Initially, I thought to prepare a set of slides and I did that, but then I thought that we would have probably today's session is more of an opening session, so I should not probably constrain it with my specific thoughts. Therefore, I thought to keep it more conversational and kind of in open format. The basic idea that any national education policy does have is to see that where it stands today in the overall context of the entire world, where it wants to compete, where it wants its institutions and people to be able to learn, stand, comprehend, analyze, and significantly contribute to both the nation's welfare and be a prominent participant and contributor to the affairs of the rest of the world. Obviously, this is no mean task, and there is very little likelihood of everyone thinking alike. So what most of these policies do is try and see what are the best practices around the world, what are the lessons that we learn from our own history, and how can we plan the transition over a period of time from what we have to where we wish to be. So NEP 2020 is one of the steps taken by a body of experts as installed by government of India in that direction. This at best is a document which probably would provide us some good thoughts, some ideas, and would be taken more as guideline in certain directions rather than something which would be considered purely regulatory in view for the purpose of compliance. Because openness is one of the key ideas here, and given that freedom of expansion, freedom of doing things differently, yet in a credible and good way, so as to compete with the ways which might have been explicitly mentioned, would be inherent in this. The initial slide deck that I had prepared had a title, NEP 2020 and Beyond. And what we wanted to say was that from the NEP 2020, we moved to somewhere what would be called probably LNMIIT NEP++. We set expectations, we identify challenges, we examine opportunities in the context of our vision, and create a strategic time-bound action plan. However, I thought that it would be probably better that I keep some of those thoughts at this point in time to myself and rather take us all through this initial awareness program that we have, which would set a stage for those of us who have already gone through the document of NEP 2020 and probably read through some additional documents that we might have been interested in. It would probably set a stage for discussion, will bring new ideas apart from the ideas mentioned in the document. At the same time, I would probably share a few things with you after talking about a few things on NEP 2020 itself. So we are all aware that national policy on education was first brought in a significant way in form of a document in 1986, was further modified in 92, and a major shift from those days reflects now in this current document, NEP 2020. The principal vision of this is very simple: making the Indian education system comparable to the best in the world by the year 2040. And this obviously does mean there is almost a 20-year plan that is supposed to be executed in time certain things have to be done earlier, certain things would probably take a little more time. Interestingly, in certain stages, these implementation plans are already underway, depending upon which tier of education we are talking about. Higher education is one of the sectors where earliest set of reforms are expected to be implemented. We at NMIT had already made a quite start, quite some time back. We carried out a set of reforms with the help of many thought processes which collective wisdom of an institution did provide at the individual faculty discussion level, at the departmental level, at the academic council level, and certain things even came from governing council discussions over there. When you read carefully this document of NEP 2020, and we go through some of the things that our speakers of these 3 days would make us feel about, we will notice that quite a few of those features which this document talks about, we already have had for quite some time, and a few of these we have introduced over last few years also. Yes, there are areas in which we need to scale up. There are areas where we have not entered, right? Had been talking about a little, but have not gone over there. And there are certain areas which do require our immediate and timely attention. So all of those will be identified obviously in due course of time. This awareness and discussion series probably would enable and accelerate that. Purpose of this seminar series is to increase awareness amongst all of us, faculty, research scholars, staff, students involved. So in a way, a lot of ecosystem that we live in, and many of the stakeholders would be consulted in the process. We probably need to evolve an action plan to move ahead of the curve. There are 7 pillars. If we carefully analyze the NEP 2020 document in our limited context of higher education, and that too in the context of the kind of setting that we are in. These are generic in nature, but specific meanings would vary when we apply the similar principles or expectations to the discipline that we are talking about. These 7 pillars include quality of learning. How do they expect to do it? They expect it to be done through purposiveness, holistic learning, multidisciplinary focus, by creation of optimal learning environment. They expect us to have innovation in terms of pedagogical thinking. And of course, they would recommend that this quality of learning benefits from the rigor that is expected at the level of higher education, but also does bring in a flexible curriculum to enable that. And all this while focus on ethics, soft skills, and life skills continues. The second pillar is quality of research. Please remember, we are discussing today in a limited context of the higher education, though there would be deliberations which will connect the 4-year school education learning model at the upper end of the school education, then how does it actually easily get connected to the higher education system. So quality of research, the main ingredients which this policy looks at does involve adoption of the best practices, time-bound and focused research where possible, global visibility through multi-institutional and international collaborations, participation in competitive high-quality scholarly events, which could include meetings of appropriate kind at the topmost level, various interest group discussions at the international level, depending upon the subject matter area, publication in top quality journals, technology development, IP creation and transfer. All of these are the elements involved, but these are not the only factors which go into quality of research. I have tried to extract a few things over here because we are just starting today as part of our awareness series. Use of technology is another thing which is supposed to pervade all aspects, whether it is in terms of digital online content, local, flipped, blended, remote or hybrid learning, use of integrated educational enterprise resource planning system, associated learning analytics, research, and other governance services, whichever be the aspect. Technology would pervade all of these. We already have seen, thanks to the pandemic that we did face and we are still facing, some of these things have already started making us involved greater than at an accelerated pace than they probably would have had the pandemic not been there. As we know that adversity teaches us quite a few things. Sometimes certain things are good for us when we learn and use them. Student enablement is yet another pillar of it. They expect it to be done through providing support to students in variety of forms, equity, inclusion, easy movement of students from across disciplines and institutions where it makes sense, leading to the need of multiple entry and exit options to be made more simple, hybrid learning choices to be made available to the student, academic bank of credit provision, where people from accredited institutions and recognized bodies who earn a few credit points get recognized and considered part of a program that they might be enrolled in, though there would be certain specific provisions for that. And then content and instruction in multiple Indian languages where possible and relevant. Faculty enrichment is next of the pillars, where they expect this to be done by selection and grooming of high quality faculty at the input level, ensuring lifelong learning and training by motivating them, energizing them, creating a conducive environment, enabling career growth, at the same time making accountability. This particular document also envisions and recommends quite a few reforms in leadership and governance aspects, including restructuring, decentralization, curated autonomy, increase in transparency and accountability. The last of the 7 pillars is about consolidation of what our systems of higher learning do have, avoiding fragmentation and creating 2 broad types of institutions that they are talking about. One, large colleges which would have good amount of autonomy for awarding up to undergraduate degrees, and second, research intensive universities which would be multidisciplinary in nature, comprehensive, and would be typically large and would act as knowledge hubs. So these are the 7 pillars in our context that NEP 2020 does talk about. If we talk about, I do not know how many of you do recollect or had an opportunity to take a look at the Vision 2035 document that the Institute had created with input from many of you. It is stated that the Institute aspires to create a niche for itself in both Indian and global arenas by adopting a multidisciplinary approach with a focus on contemporarily relevant as well as emerging areas of research, development, teaching, learning, entrepreneurship, outreach, and collaboration, while maintaining an ecosystem that would ensure work-life balance of its faculty and staff and enable well-rounded personality development of its students. It also said It shall be achieved with the help of a sustainable strategic plan involving long-term, medium-term, and short-term milestones achieved through mission mode projects led by different work groups. Please remember, this document was shared after creation with the help of many of you and many people from outside of the institute, including a few people who are thought leaders in their own right and governing council members, and was okayed by the chairman of the governing council himself. It was created in 2017-18 and was shared in its first version in 2018, well before the NEP 2020 document did come in. We also had prepared a 15-year strategic plan of action in these areas. What we need to do is, probably we need to assess ourselves with respect to that, where do we stand today, in the broad context that NEP 2020 sets us to take a careful look at. What are the things which we have already achieved? What are the things which probably we need to do in a prioritized manner in each one of these areas, specifically these 7 pillars? Within these, there would be, of course, multiple different areas which we need to focus on, but we do need to work out a priority and a workable timeline. And all of this will require probably multiple focus group discussions involving many of you, and result will be a modified document which would probably be what I envision as LNMIT NEP++ document, which would try to ensure that our vision is taken care of. At the same time, we remain contemporary relevant and preferably ahead of many with whom we aspire to compete. We would love to have an enabling system here, which, while would enable, encourage, and provision for good quality research and appropriately recognize it, would also equally well encourage, recognize, and facilitate high quality teaching learning process by bringing the best teaching learning practices, preferably of participative and experiential kind, the way it might appropriately apply to a given subject or a discipline. We would want to have a situation wherein people from across probably a discipline like physics or mathematics could move easily because of the curricular structure that we do enable, because of the academic council regulations that we bring in, to, if they want, probably to an area of liberal arts, or if they do want, they could probably move across to an engineering domain, and they could choose a few subjects from each one of the areas and create their own program with some curated advice that could enable that. We could probably allow people coming with different types of preparations into the system at different levels and choose to either complete the program that we offer at bachelor's, master's, and higher levels, or could probably choose, if they so aspire, after probably 1 year, 2 year, 3 year period, if it is a 4-year program that we are talking about, to a new program which might be offered elsewhere, or they might want to try and get into, by taking a pause, into an entrepreneurial setup that we already allow. Degree on pause has been enabled by us for quite some time. Multiple choices for different types of entrepreneurship is already in place. However, this is just a beginning. We need to allow different types of horizontal and vertical transfer. It should be technically possible for a student who, because of family pressure or peer pressure, gets admitted into a branch of engineering. Say he gets into BTech computer science and engineering, and later on finds his heart is actually in physics or mathematics. How do we enable this all in a seamless way? Would always require a little interaction with the student, take a look at the way he has been performing, understanding his aspirations, and then probably through a curated method of advice, help him or her create a plan that will allow those aspirations to be met. So there are quite a few of those things which we are creating through separate documents. There is a draft note that I am preparing, which will be shared with the AC EPC, which is the policy making body of the academic council, and soon will be shared with each one of you once AC EPC adequately discusses amongst itself, and then we will come back, take input of each one of you faculty and students, apart from other stakeholders at a later stage, before we begin working towards it in a time-bound way. So I believe now we are all eager to listen to our senior and energetic young colleagues, both when their time comes. I believe first one is probably Professor Gorthi's webinar today. So thank you all for creating this opportunity for all of us to learn about NEP 2020. And as we go along, let us brainstorm and help create a beautiful system which could be in line and beyond NEP 2020. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir, for the inaugural address and highlighting the key features and 7 pillars of NEP 2020. It is really a great start to the webinar series, we can say. So now with this, I would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Gorthi, who will deliver a talk on the topic that is Introduction to NEP 2020 and Vision for India's Higher Education System. Sir, you may please share your screen to present the slides.
Am I audible fairly well?
Yes, sir.
And is the screen appearing?
Yes, sir. Your screen is being shared now.
Okay. Okay. I'll just make it full screen. You're all able to see the screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. NEP, National Education Policy, the vision and introduction, that's my part. And before I begin my part, very quickly, if you think that this NEP is any monster, no, it's not at all any monster. No partial differential equations, fortunately or unfortunately. It has 27 chapters, which are not difficult to understand, consisting of the vision and the introduction, about school education system, part 2, higher education system, part 3, other key areas of focus, and finally making it happen. So the NEP covers from the vision to making it happen. The goal of my presentation is to demystify, if you have any fears about NEP, I would provide a bird's eye view, umbrella view of an understanding of why NEP at all, and introduction to what NEP purports to achieve. The subsequent talks would give details on this purport to achieve, purpose of and the various parts of what needs to be carried out. This introductory part, you may find time to time, has overlapping emphasis. This overlapping emphasis is not from me. All parts are from the NEP document, not mine. NEP is easy to understand, but bringing in the reforms that transform the education system, that is the challenge. Bringing in the reforms that transform the education system, that is the challenge. My presentation I have structured into 2 parts, why and the what. In why, I cover the origins, part of the why, and the vision, and the context, where India has been in the last 30-40 years, and what do we learn, and what are the influencing factors leading to the conception and creation of national education policy, and the purpose to be served by this national education policy. Then we will cover NEP, what NEP purports to achieve, the principles, the underlying principles behind NEP, and the quality expectations of universities, and the high vision of higher education system. Those are the ones that I would cover. So let's begin with the origins. The late TSR Subramaniam, ex-cabinet secretary of Government of India Committee. Please feel free to, I'm only seeing the big screen, so I won't know if any other way. So you unmute and ask, interrupt, etc. I'll try to make it a discussion, self-discussion, because it's the first talk. Maybe we would have a series of further discussions. Feel free. Ex-cabinet secretary committee that was submitted in May 28, National Policy on Education, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals adopted by United Nations. India was signatory in 2015. That provided good set, and the goal 4 was quality of education. That provided inputs to an 11-member Kasturirangan committee with national and international experts like Professor Manjul Bhargava, a field medalist mathematician. There are quite a few out of these 11, and Dr. Shikila Shamshu, a famous educationist, as the member secretary, and they have submitted their draft report to MHRD, Government of India, in May 2019. And Union Cabinet of Government of India approved NEP in July 2020. Next, after the origins leading to the NEP, creation and conception and creation of NEP, the vision set out by NEP, very great vision. Let's have a look at some of them. Universal high quality education is the best way forward for developing and maximizing our country's rich talents and resources. For what? For the good of the individuals, for the good of the society, for the good of the country, and the good of the world. Universal high quality education is identified as the best way forward. Providing universal access. If there is a good quality education here and there in metros, what is the use? Universal access to quality education is the key to India's continued ascent and leadership, where leadership on the global stage for what? In terms of economic growth, social justice and equality, scientific advancement, national integration, cultural preservation, etc. For these things, we need universal access to quality education. Some more parts of the vision. Ensure, a beautiful point, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. We'll find some more places an emphasis on learning to learn for lifelong as an important component. The aim must be for India to have an education system by 2040. Please remember, education system, a working system, not a document. By 2040, that is second to none. It's good to have such. This national education policy envisions an education system that contributes directly to transforming India, not indirectly, somewhat proportionately, etc. Directly transforming India. That's the vision, thereby making India a global education power. Such a great vision requires entire education system to be reconfigured. These are not my words. These are the phrases from the document. Entire education system to be reconfigured to support and foster learning. We are lucky. We are already, Allanamati has been taking lots of initiatives, but let's look at the NEP related matter. Now, after this vision, great vision, let's look at the document looked at the context of the last 30-40 years of India and what are the influencing factors leading to the conception and creation of NEP. The world is undergoing rapid changes in knowledge landscape. It is becoming increasingly critical that children not only learn but more importantly, learn how to keep learning. So this introduction is for all the parts that cover primary education to middle school to high school to higher education. So some of them are common. They dovetail, and there is an emphasis on integrated approach covering all the areas than silos, here and there kind of an approach. So learn how to keep learning. That is the important influencing factor identified. There will be a need for skilled workforce, particularly in math, computer science, data science. What do we do with this? Unless we apply them to multidisciplinary abilities across sciences, social sciences, humanities, etc., and also towards biology, chemistry, physics, agricultural, in all other areas, accounting, legal, etc. There will be a need for multidisciplinary learning. There is an emphasis. Actually, we will find later in my talk that the universities should become multidisciplinary universities by 2030. These are the influencing factors. There will be a growing demand for humanities and art as India moves towards, besides the sciences and mathematics, etc. Pedagogy must evolve to make education more experiential. Beautiful. So no cramming and getting by heart and producing in the exams and then getting those marks. More experiential, holistic, with adequate. How do they play in the society? Integrated from primary school to higher education. Inquiry driven, discovery oriented, learner centered, discussion based, flexible. So a good set of influencing factors are identified. Therefore, the curriculum must include basic arts, crafts, humanities, games, sports. At the moment, some of them are optional. They're extracurricular, not even co-curricular, in addition to the mainstream of sciences and mathematics, whatever, engineering, accountancy, legal, medicine, etc. Education must build character. That's what is identified. Enable learners to be ethical, rational, compassionate, caring, while at the same time preparing for good employment. This is what leads them to have a great impact and influence. Like Subrata Bhakti said in his book separately, gap between current state of learning and learning outcomes and what is required must be bridged. How? Through undertaking major reforms that bring the highest quality, equity, integrity, etc. into the system. So there is a need for bridging the gap between current state and what is envisioned. Education must develop both the foundational capabilities, and the higher order cognitive capabilities. What are the foundational? Literacy and numeracy on one side, and higher order critical thinking and problem solving, whether it's a skilled worker with a high school or a postgraduate, the critical thinking and problem solving are to be inculcated. The new education policy must re-establish teachers. There is a focus on education services, public service, education as a public service. Let's see and wait and see, but these are the good things that we are hearing at the moment. The aim must be for India to have an education system, as I mentioned, in the vision. Teacher must be at the center of fundamental reforms, while student learner is the center for the whole focus of NEP, who will bring the reforms. Not administrators alone, they can't do all that. Teachers are at the center of fundamental reforms in the education system. While at the same time, we have basic methods of quality control and accountability. They used a beautiful term, which I will introduce very soon, called light and tight. I'll explain there. Local and global needs of the country should be taken into account with a respect for and deference to rich diversity and culture, which is part of our country. So they're very sensitive way of phrasing the influencing factors. The last few. There should be a critical focus on national pride. Okay? So looks like they didn't leave much. right? As Professor Banerjee mentioned, there was a national policy on education introduced in Parliament, approved by the then cabinet in 1986, modified in 1992, and the right of children to free and compulsory education. They have dovetailed, offered a context to the design, to the conception and creation of this NEP. So these are the context of India background, and which led to the creation of this NEP. Next, let us look at the purpose that is to be served by NEP. A very, very important slide, part of the document. I pulled it out. The purpose of the education system should be to develop good human beings who are capable of rational thought and action. We all remember Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore's famous lines, right? Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. Human beings that are capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy, courage and resilience, scientific temper, as well as creativity. So this is the purpose set out to be served by NEP. Just a quick check. I covered why NEP. The nation has been thinking of national policy on education. It has its origins now, the approved one in 2020, to be implemented in stages, as Professor Banerjee mentioned, at the national level, and for us at the LNMIT, the vision statements we picked up, the context and influencing factors, and the purpose set out by this NEP. Nikhil, is my voice clear enough?
Yes, sir. It is very much clear.
Okay. Now let's move on to the second part of my talk. Let me look at the time. Of course, I will not exceed. I might try to cover up the time. Okay. What NEP purports to achieve in terms of the principles underlying the national education policy, quality expectations on the universities, and vision for higher education system. Because the rest of the sections, we don't have to look at the section on primary, middle, and high school, but the sections on, a part of the section on higher education is what I'm covering as part of the vision and introduction, and all our eminent speakers will be covering the rest of the parts over the next 8 talks over the 3 days on higher education system. And we also need to have one good discussion on the making it happen, which is, okay, I'm sure Dr. Nikhil and others are looking at. Now, principles underlying NEP. A good education institution is one in which every student feels welcomed and cared for. These are not motherhood statements. There should be a way that these are taken care and there is a gradual improvement. So the quality assurance plays an important role on setting up the parameters, measuring them in tangible ways, and then saying, are we sustaining, are we improving, and so on and so on. These are very, very important going to be. Where a safe and stimulating learning environment, if we ask the last 5 years batches, 10-year batches, what do you feel? And then what is good, what is lacking? Is there a safe and stimulating learning environment? We should not think for ourselves, right? Definitely the stakeholders have to say that. Where a wide range of learning experiences, not few, a wide range of learning experiences. We may be having a few learning experiences, but we should now start focusing on a bigger range of learning experiences, where good physical infrastructure and appropriate resources conducive to learning, possibly we are very good. Attaining these qualities must be the goal of every educational institution set by the NEP. Continuing on the principles, foundational principles, they have identified, and I'm presenting it to you. Recognizing, identifying, and fostering capabilities of each student. Right? Very tall task. By sensitizing both the teachers and the parents to promote each student's holistic development. A lot of work to be done. Offering the highest priority to achieving foundational, this is at the school level, Flexibility, so that learners have the ability to choose their learning trajectories. Possibly we are good, but we can be better in terms of flexibility. Their own paths in life according to their strengths, talents, and interests. Emphasis on conceptual understanding, a beautiful point. Let's look at it. Emphasis on conceptual learning rather than rote learning and learning for exams. Get by heart, cram it, producing the paper, answer sheet. No, conceptual learning. Is he learning to learn? Is he evolving in his cognitive capabilities to understand the concepts and the techniques? No hard separation, continuing on the principles between arts and sciences, between curricular and extracurricular. I would love a discussion and a debate where extracurricular is very optional in some institutions. Possibly LNM might too. Can we do better? We are very good, no doubt about it. Excellent leadership team is there, but we can definitely debate for improvements. Curricular and co-curricular go together hand in hand. Some of them become co-curricular with credits between vocational and academic streams in order to eliminate harmful hierarchies. Multidisciplinarity and holistic education across sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities, sports for a multidisciplinary world. There is a focus on multidisciplinary offerings. Creativity and critical thinking. There's a good focus on ability to think and solve problems rather than cramming and producing answers. Encourage logical decision making, particular to the context, particular to Rajasthan, particular to India, particular to the society, particular to the current situation. So those are the principles they identified. Ethics, human values, and constitutional values, right? Like empathy, respect for others, cleanliness, etc., which we know. But is one course of 3 credits sufficient? You have to think. I personally feel, who am I? 2 cents, not sufficient. We need to do more in that area, possibly. Just a little thinking rather than reading these slides, right? Promoting multilingualism. Even this document at one point says we have to have both institutions in English and in some local language. After all, English was the local language for some people. We have our own local language for hundreds and hundreds of years. A good mixture is very good for the education system. Life skills, no doubt about it.
Professor Gurti, sorry to interrupt. Director sir has raised a hand. He wanted to say something between.
Sure. I'll let me see how I can see others.
Thank you, Professor Gurti, for mentioning about certain value and ethics related things. I just had a question. Probably the way you started saying that we could probably keep interacting while you are presenting, though the original format, I believe, suggested by Dr. Nikhil was that we probably have this brainstorming after the presentations get over. But I would, by respecting what you suggested, I just had a question. I thought that we could probably have this as a kind of question, an open question from my side. You could answer, anybody else could answer. But if you would like to suggest your view, you mentioned in the passing that probably through courses, I had a feeling that courses, in the way they are typically handled across the institutions, to teach ethics, to teach values, etc., too many of the courses probably may not, but would they really help, or whether practicing them, making them participate in certain things which would make them realize the value over and above probably a course or two, would make more sense? Or do you think having multiple courses would be the answer?
I'll give my 2 cents. small man, but I will open to the other experts that we are fortunate that we are having. My 2 cents are, it so happens I'm lucky that I'm studying certain philosophies for last 2.5 years, a little more than that, very studiously, like every day evening 5 to 6. What I learned is one need to study, learn from a teacher. That's very, most philosophy says learn from the books and the teacher, but there is an important component, whatever name they give, that is of digesting, internalizing, all right, making it into your firmware of the body, that you instantly stick to ethics. When you have a choice, you don't go to the wrong side, you would go to the right. If you have a doubt, you have the teacher, a mentor to fall to. So I don't mind. So both are important. Out of 150, 160 credits, 3 credits for that is important. Recently, I was talking to a few educationalists for some reason, whatever, with a purpose, and they say that 60%, even if we look at some of the books in that area, including Subrata Bhatchi's, the 60% is the attitude for the rest of the life, and 40% is the whole partial, differential, integral, computer science and whatever. Replace it with the mechanical and one, etc. So if not 60%, at least some more degree of one, and there should be not left free. There should be something done in second year. There should be something done on the third year. All right. What did the recent MOU said? The person said, right from second year, this attitude needs to be developed. It doesn't come at the 7th semester while facing the interviews. So we all know it. So shall I finish my one? I suggest, Professor Banerjee, why don't you create today itself, maybe a discussion one, or a series of discussions from once these 9 talks are over. Very, very important. This is not a document. This is to be implemented.
I believe we can go as per the original recommendation of Dr. Nikhil, that we could probably have presentations followed by the discussions as the first step, and later on we could always have separate sessions, because this webinar series is the first first step to making everyone aware of.
Yeah.
May I give Professor Gorthi? May I give a brief comment about what has been raised? Probably in the discussion here, just for half a minute.
Sure.
See, ethics. Professor Banerjee was mentioning, and probably you are also referring to in the courses and all that, right? I think ethics, integrity, honesty, right? I don't think, in my view, these can be taught, right, in a course, or in a couple of courses, in a couple of lectures, like you have 20 lectures or 30 lectures or 40 lectures, right? I think these are the things which are inherited by and large. And to a large extent, these come right to a child, right, when the child is out of the womb, right? And right from day one, right? This is the upbringing and all that in a family, right, with his or her parents or with other siblings, right? These come gradually. See, these come gradually. What we are talking of here, we have courses on ethics, whether it's VEE or whether it's RPE, comprising of a semester course, 20 lectures, 30 lectures, 40 lectures. It's not going to make much of a difference, in my view. I may be wrong. Right? It's not going to make much of a difference.
Yeah, I got your point. Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
See, the ones that I heard, I happen to have heard quite a few philosophers in the last 2-3 years. A man should not be content with what I am born with. Not at all. Every philosophy, Eastern and Western, of different countries, they say we have the fundamental responsibility to learn and evolve.
As far as learning is concerned, learning is knowing.
Learn and evolve, not in partial differentiation.
No denying on that. Right.
No, let me, not in sciences alone, not in arts and accountancy and legal, about the most important thing in life, which is the way to live. The way to live. So, Dr. Nikhil, I started 10-15 minutes late. Shall we go this way, or shall I finish my? Otherwise, there is advantage and disadvantage. So, what should I do?
Sir, how much of your presentation is left?
Mine is full 1 hour. So 10 part. I'll try to do it faster.
Okay. So, sir,
You gave me 1 hour. Right?
Yeah. We can, finish off the presentation first, and we could take up the discussions later on.
We'll have a series of discussions. If possible, in the afternoon onwards, you create 1 hour. But Narendra raised his hand. I can understand definitely why. So, so with your permissions, I'm continuing my one. Can you see my slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I'm open, even though I'm life skills like communication, cooperation, teamwork, and resilience. These are all learned over a period of time. Fortunately, this document says there will be an integrated effort from school to higher education, not just in second, third year of engineering or medicine or wherever. Focus on regular formative assessment. A beautiful point. Formative assessment for learning rather than summative assessment, which come from coaching culture. How well is he understanding the concepts and techniques, and how well he can apply them, not by cramming and mugging up. Principles continued. Extensive use of technology in teaching and learning. Remove language barriers. Fortunately, we are good in that one. The document is for all. So there is an emphasis on those who are unable to reach out. Respect for diversity and respect for local context in all curriculum pedagogy, and then pedagogy and policy. Full equity and inclusion as the cornerstone, we understand. Another beautiful point, synergy in curriculum across all levels, not in patchwork, not here and there. A synergy from primary to middle to high school to higher education. That's the underlying principle of this NEP. Teachers and faculty members are the heart of learning process, so their recruitment, continuous professional development will be very important. Later on, there is a mention about public service. If that teaching becomes a noble, fairly well-respected profession. Beautiful word, a light but tight regulatory framework. Having implemented a lot, if we don't measure every year, where are we and where we aspire to go, is there an improvement or not? So the quality assurance plays a very, very important role. In my opinion, the quality assurance in many places, I was talking to some of the friends in older IITs, is nowhere adequate at all. So there should be a measurable sustenance and improvement. Outstanding research, we understand, core requisite for outstanding teaching. Continuous review of progress based on sustained research and regular assessment. One. So continuous review of progress of the experts, the teachers, the faculty. Pride in our country, these are additional points. Education as a public service. Let's wait and see how it takes shape. If it becomes Indian education service, just as IAS, also there will be a great, beautiful improvement. Substantial investment in strong, vibrant education system, as well as encouragement and facilitation of true philanthropic and community. We are actually on that participative mode here, so we understand that. Substantial one is there in the document. These are the underlying principles. We'll move on with these principles set out. These are all from the document. Not much to understand, but the difficulty is in really taking the reforms that transform. The quality expectations on the universities, a new and forward-looking vision for India's higher education system. Fortunately, Professor Banerjee has already shared a vision for 15 years, but this is for the whole of the country. All types of higher education, not just engineering. Higher education plays an extremely important role in promoting human as well as societal well-being. We understand that. Higher education significantly contributes towards sustainable livelihood. Quality of higher education must aim to develop good, thoughtful, well-rounded, creative individuals. So these are forward-looking expectations. It must enable individuals to study one or more specialized areas of interest at a deeper level. Some more on the quality expectations. Quality of higher education must enable personal accomplishment and enlightenment, constructive public engagement. So it must enable the contribution to the society and productive contribution to the society. For purposes of developing holistic individuals, it is essential that an identified set of skills and values be incorporated, possibly from middle school. All those attitudes I mentioned, they take 10, 15 years, some of them. What I learned and heard and learned will be incorporated from high school, so school to higher education, not in silos. An integrated approach. Higher education must form the basis for knowledge creation, a beautiful point. Higher education must form the basis for knowledge creation and innovation. Purpose of quality higher education is therefore more than creation of greater opportunities for individual employment, 5%, 3%, employment figures at college levels or university levels. Its purpose is to build a vibrant nation. So when the things are implemented holistic, it definitely can contribute to our nation. Some more quality, some of the problems with higher education system. Not all education systems may have severely fragmented ecosystem, right? There is a separate extracurricular, separate set of clubs, a separate academic part of it, all right, and a separate internship facility, a separate, everyone creates for his own, cross migration into other disciplines, into other universities, cross-cultural pollination, they are saying. Less emphasis on the development. So every year, how many do we send out who come back with cross-pollination? How many do interdisciplinary courses, right? What is the mechanism we provide? So there are several steps. There are lots of well-talented, intelligent colleagues here. Lesser emphasis on research at most universities. It applies to many universities. Suboptimal governance. We don't have those problems. An effective regulatory system. A regulatory system that measures where are we in the last 3 years and where we should be. Right? Many good organizations do that. Where are we in the last 3-5 years? Where do we want to go on a continuous yearly basis? Large affiliating universities resulting in low standards. Policy envisions a complete overall and re-energizing of the higher education system to overcome. A complete overall is what is submitted by this honorable committee of experts, national and international, to really make India what they aspire for. Now, vision for higher education system. So we looked at the principles, we looked at quality expectations. Let me check my time. I'm much within 1 hour. May finish faster and open for some questions. The vision for higher education, the policy vision includes the following key challenges to the current higher education system. Moving towards a higher education system consisting of large multidisciplinary universities with multidisciplinary offerings. More HIEs, higher education institutes across India, that offer programs in local Indian languages simultaneously to the ones that we have, most of them offer in English. Revamping curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, and student support for enhanced, beautiful point, student experiences. We need to bring in these experiences in tangible ways if possible. The students going out and who have left 3 years back would say, once they are in the world, come back, right back and say we had an experience-based learning. Governance of HAIs by highly qualified independent boards, some engineering services, public service for effectiveness at the national level. Possibly the last one on the vision. The policy includes the following key changes to the higher education. Establishment of a national research foundation. Sure, there is a wide range of funding which I gathered for last 5-6 years or maybe 8 years going on, which used to be in lakhs to crore. Now everything is in terms of crores, a wide range of institutions. Now the next one, light but tight regulation by a single regulator for higher education. All this document, even if implemented, should have a sense that we are progressing. Each one should have a sense that we are progressing, and not by claiming, but by actual measurements. Scholarship by private philanthropic universities, we know about it. Online education and open distance learning, in addition to on-campus one. On-campus has its beauty for the learning environment, but similar things should be offered as much as possible once the pandemic is out through online edition. Maybe we can, Professor Banerjee himself is from BITS Pilani. I keep hearing from a couple of friends in BITS Pilani that their online education is so well developed. We can pick up some threads there. Now, what did I cover? I covered the why part. We need to have a national education policy, an integrated one that encompasses primary school to higher education. Right? It has a vision. It has looked at how we are for the last 30-40 years and dovetailed that into the new national education policy and set a purpose to be served by this. And then they articulated. If you ask, is that all the NEP? No, this is only the beginning. The bird's eye view, curtain riser, demystifying. It's not a monster. It's a beautiful, beautiful document for really making progress and enjoying the progress. The principles behind the quality expectations and the vision of higher education system. So these are all from Professor Banerjee. He offered a beautiful template, which I am using. So let me see. Though I started 10-15 minutes late, I finished 4-5 minutes earlier. Not bad, I think, right? And then, so I don't mind listening to Dr. Narendra, because now Professor Anupam Singh need not be delayed much, not like it. So, Professor Narendra, can I listen to you so that I keep thinking before the discussion forums?
I was wanting to contribute to the debate whether human values could be a learned behavior or it is learned by seeing. It happens both ways in a way. But one of the things that I feel when we talk about ethics or human values is that we take it in a narrow sense, and that's where the problem happens. The thing is that by teaching human values and ethics, it is not guaranteed that every one of these students will behave in ethical way. But the thing that is also taught is to critically analyze the situation. So to give you an example, there can be two perspectives. One is called utilitarian perspective, which says that you analyze the cost benefit, moral cost benefit analysis of something, which is what capitalism mostly follows. But on the other hand, you have the other aspect, which is the duty ethics or deontological ethics, which says that you should not waver from your duty, whatever be the consequences. So whether you follow the consequences or you follow the intended consequences, because whenever a decision is taken, it is taken based on the intended consequences. Real consequences may be different. So a deontologist will always say that don't take a decision based on intended consequences, because you can't control the real consequences. So follow the duty, follow the rules, follow the norms. So this kind of critical thinking comes only when it is taught in the classroom, because what you can learn is basic human values. right? But even, for instance, we were talking about integrity, and NEP talks about integrity, but integrity to what? Or integrity to whom? Can national integrity, like it talks about, be dangerous at times? What happened during Hitler's time, for instance? To whom do you show your integrity? To German people, to the culture of Germany, or to an individual, which was right. So there are nuances to ethical functionings, and those kind of nuances possibly.
Beautiful. I got your point. Can I add there? We'll have a longer discussion. It
Yes, sir.
so happened that after reading Subrata Baki's book on The Professional, where he covered the disadvantages of being unethical, he cited cases where they were jailed while being CEO and earning millions of dollars, quite a few publicly available. And he also led me to a few reports from Harvard Business on the attitude, ethics, and impact. I read those papers. Some of the things you mentioned are there, and so there is a hierarchy of to the individual, to the family, to the society, to the nation, and to the globe. And some philosophies bring this fairly well. There is need for learning and practicing once they are aware of the dangers of people like Ratan Tata, or let's not name those who are really great, have earned name for being value based for 50 years in 50,000 areas, situations, not one or two here and there, right? Consistent. That comes from not by birth, by learning. Every individual is capable of, provided they learn. Okay. So definitely, as the dean, please, and the NEP is, major focus is on education, which is DOA. You are driving already. Please drive some discussions. Mine are very, small and 2 cents here and there. Yeah. Not to interrupt you, but let's ask Nikhil, where are we and what should we do? Dr. Shakti Balan raised one. I'll read that out, but I'll give it to Nikhil, without delaying Professor Anupam saying I should stop it. Shakti Balan said, in general, learning occurs in 4 ways, etc. So there's a lot needs to be. That Shakti Balan will definitely get opportunities during discussions. Dr. Nikhil, shall I
Yes.
stop?
Sir, I don't want you to stop, but we are running little late on the time schedule. But yeah, I would really like to thank you, sir, for such an informative talk.
Did I cover something? Did I really bring in some demystifying?
Definitely, sir, definitely. You explained the philosophy behind the NEP 2020 very excellently, you can say. And I hope all of us have now got a really good idea of NEP 2020, and thanks to your talk for that. Very efficiently, you touched upon almost all the contents of NEP 2020 and answered the 2 important questions, which is why and what, right? So thank you, sir, for setting up the stage so excellently. Thank you so much. Now, since we are running a
Thank
little
you
bit,
very much for the opportunity.
most welcome, sir. All right. So we'll cut short on the discussion session, and we'd like to invite our second speaker for today's webinar session, Professor Anupam Singh. Topic of his talk is institutional restructuring and multidisciplinary education, which is one of the key pillar of NEP 2020, as already highlighted by Director Sir. So I would like to invite Professor Anupam Singh.
Good morning to all of you. It's been a pleasure for me to listen to the discussion so far. I thank Dr. Nikhil, our director, and Professor Gorti for the discussions and opening up our minds on some of these important issues. I have been requested to speak on, so let me actually start sharing my screen so you can follow along. Okay, so this is what I'll be talking about. I'll go to full screen in a minute, but right now the content is so light that let me take the liberty of seeing if any hands go up, and if anybody has any comment. Once I go to full screen, I do request that you please unmute your mic so I don't miss your valuable inputs. I do like the presentations to be very interactive, and in fact, my goal in this presentation will be to finish my part of the presentation within the first half hour and then leave the last half hour for entirely for discussions. But nevertheless, even in the first part of the discussion, if at any point you feel there's a point you would like to make, please do feel free to do that. I would welcome that. So what I've been asked to discuss with you, or rather give you the exposure to from the national education policy, is institutional restructuring and multidisciplinary education. So I should clarify that in fact this is based on 2 chapters of the national education policy, one of them on institutional restructuring and the other on holistic and multidisciplinary education. And indeed, the reason I think I was asked to do both of these is because the largest focus of institutional restructuring is actually to enable holistic and multidisciplinary education. And in fact, the NEP says it itself. This is not my interpretation of what's going on. So the way I will structure my presentation will be first couple of slides I request you to indulge me. I sort of try to provide some inspiration and motivation as to why multidisciplinary education is important. And in fact, then we take up after that verbatim pretty much from the national education policy, and what they have to say on multidisciplinary education and how to restructure our institutions so as to enable multidisciplinary education. And then I'll end with a couple of slides on questions / thoughts to reflect on. And then I'll open it up for discussions for everybody. I mean, and as I said, you don't have to wait till that point. If at any point you feel you can add, please do add. In fact, I'm going to now go to the full screen mode, which means that I will not be able to see your hands being raised or your comments if you put them in the chat box. And therefore, please do unmute your mic and provide any input you think is valuable. All right, with that, let me go to the full screen. All right, so this is, of course, what I've been tasked to do. And all right, so first I want to ask you to indulge me a little bit. I'll start off with a poem from Rabindranath Tagore. The reason is twofold. First, of course, I find it inspirational. I think it's relevant to what I've been asked to talk about. And I will sort of highlight that once we finish with the poem as to how it's relevant. But also it sort of sets the tone for and provides some motivation to delve into some of the topics that we'll be delving into, some of which can otherwise be dry, but obviously the way Rabindranath Tagore puts it, it is very inspirational. So indulge me for a minute and please read this poem with me. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. And I am not sure whether this is part of the NEP. I don't think this is part of the NEP, but I'm sure that the people who framed the NEP would agree that this is inspirational and certainly helps get the nation where we want it to be. At least that is my opinion. And again, you are welcome to comment on it if you disagree. But the second part of it, let me now do a little bit of a deep dive and draw your attention to these words and why it's relevant to what I'm going to follow. Was there a comment or a question? I heard a blink, but I don't know whether if there is a question or comment, please.
Sir, the slides are not moving if in case you are scrolling the slides.
Okay, no. Right now I'm not. Thank you for the feedback. In a minute, I'll be going to the next slide, and if you don't see the next slide in a minute, then please do let me know. But right now, it's been frozen. So what I want to actually highlight here are these words where the world has not been broken up into fragments, and so that's the cue to the next slide, and that's the connection. So this is the visual I have of why multidisciplinary education is important.
Professor Anupam, I think the slides are not moving.
Slides are not moving. All right. Thank you. Let me see. All right. Can you see the screen now?
Yes. Now I'm able to see that institutional restructuring. Right?
Okay. And you can see the slides moving now?
Yes.
Okay. So let me, instead of going to this full screen mode, which I'm not quite sure why it was not working, try an alternative, which hopefully maybe from my perspective not as good, but if you can't see the slides moving. So can you see the slides moving now?
Yes. Now you are on full screen mode and your slides are also moving.
Okay, good. All right. So you did see okay, so hang on. So you did see this slide, or you did not see this slide earlier?
Earlier,
So
we
could
could
not
not see it.
Yeah.
Okay. But you heard me read out the poem?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so then I will not necessarily, belabor this slide too much because I read it out. And here I mainly wanted to draw the attention, of course, first it's inspirational and motivational, but, see, this doesn't sort of, behind it, the reason for sharing it, part of it was, of course, the inspiration and motivation, but the other was that, the worldview cannot be fragmented, and because nature is not fragmented, and that's sort of a message, one of the many messages, and that's the message that I want to dwell on next, right? So the idea here is the following. If you want to think of it, this is either, the problems as they're presented to us, or nature or reality. So, and this is our, the way we humans break it up into various domains, right? So a square here could be, for example, one domain. A square here is another domain, and this is a problem which you're trying to now understand from this. So when this problem comes down and hits this human perception domain, then if it's a small problem, right, like this, it is very possible that it may fit entirely within one domain of human knowledge. But if it's a large problem like this, then it'll actually intersect many domains when it comes down here, right? And the nature of reality is such that more often than not, when you deal with nature, reality, problems, they actually span multiple domains. And this is why a multidisciplinary approach, in my opinion, is inescapable. If you want to deal with the world in all its complexity, in all its richness, and if you want to find value. What do I mean by that? I mean, see, you could say that, okay, I'm happy enough living in one domain here, and I'll only deal with the problems that are small, that are fitting within that domain. But the reality is this, that the value and the impact of the bigger problems is much bigger. And so typically society ends up valuing that more. And that is why education systems all over the world have evolved towards this multidisciplinary approach. So I don't know whether that made sense, or whether that was clear. And if you have questions or comments, I'm definitely open to listening to that. And if not, then of course
No,
move forward.
Professor Anupam, this is KK Khatri.
Yes, please.
Sir, this is very good representation. I appreciate the way you have presented it. But I just had a view. I think this my view particular can divert the presentation topic. But still, I want to say.
Please.
So my view is that sometimes the problems are small, like the smaller dot you have shown, but the people consider that to be a very greater problem. And in that case, they go with a very different, that means a different approach, and the complexity increases, and the solutions are simpler, but they don't go with that simpler solution. Are you getting my point?
So no, I do understand that. Okay, so there are two. First of all, I definitely understand what you're saying, and there can be two aspects to that. One is that sometimes, of course, in reality, within one domain itself, you can have complex problems, and I would not want to belittle those complex problems that are confined to one domain. But then there is also the case that you pointed out, that sometimes the small problems are magnified. And because that's, okay, let me put it in another way, which sometimes is a reflection, I think, of what you're saying. So this is a phrase which is used very often in the United States, so I don't know whether everybody's familiar with it. Let me share it. If it's not familiar, I'll explain it. Sometimes when you have a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. And what this is supposed to communicate is that if your tools are limited, then whatever the problem may be, you will actually twist and turn and make the problem more complex until it fits the solutions that you are able to provide. And that is perhaps more in line with what I think you were trying to communicate. So I do appreciate that sometimes that can happen. But in the interest of time, as you yourself pointed out, I will not probably want to go any deeper into that aspect of the single domain problem at this point in time, because I have mostly been asked to focus on the multidisciplinary problems, why they are important, and how do we transform institutions to deal with multidimensional problems, right? So with that as my task, I will sort of move forward. But towards the end, again, if we have time left and if you would like to elaborate or others would like to join that debate, I am certainly open to it. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So, all right. So let me now move forward. And so this was sort of, now I know that my primary task, so far I have been, going a slightly, so on my own perspective. And frankly, I wanted to do that primarily because I felt that it might help others relate to it much more readily. But my primary task was really that I was assigned was to share with you what the national education policy has to say on multidisciplinary education and instructional restructuring. So I now turn sort of to a verbatim discussion of that before we come to the end, where again we'll go back to a more free-flowing discussion and exchange of ideas and brainstorming. So here is, and again, by the way, I encourage all of you to take a look at the National Education Policy document if you have not done so. I obviously will not be able to capture all of it, even the parts that pertain to the multidisciplinary education. But what I've done is I've tried to pick out the parts that I felt were the most important. And then when I've done this, underlining, this emphasis and underlining is my own. It's not from the National Education Policy. So the words are from the National Education Policy, but to draw your attention to what I think is the important piece, I have underlined it, right? So that applies to the next few slides that I have on institutional restructuring and multidisciplinary education from the perspective of the NEP. So this is, first of all, the most important thing I want to share with you. And this is, by the way, this is in the words of the NEP, right? This is not my words. The main thrust of the NEP regarding higher education is to end the fragmentation of higher education by transforming higher education institutions into large multidisciplinary universities, right? So that is the goal. as the NEP states it. And that is why, I think it behooves us to spend the next, whatever 40 minutes that we have, understanding what it is that the NEP wants us to do in this context. And does it make sense in our context? What are the changes that will be needed? What are the things we can do? What are the things we cannot do? And what is the broader reality out there? And how does all this fit into the context of that? So just to continuing what the NEP says, they want to build vibrant communities of scholars, break down harmful silos, enable students to become well-rounded across disciplines, develop active research communities across disciplines, including cross-discipline. So I'm sure that we'll all agree that these are good things. But of course, if you don't, please do let me know. Then the NEP points out that moving to large multidisciplinary universities and HEI clusters is thus the highest recommendation of the NEP. And India urgently needs to create well-rounded, innovative individuals. They point out that multidisciplinary education has already transformed other countries educationally and economically, and we need to catch up. Of course, they do say before all of this here that it's not foreign to our culture, that ancient Indian universities have indeed had a multidisciplinary education approach. But in recent years, we have sort of gone away from it, and we need to come back to it. So, okay, this is just emphasizing again that, it's not a foreign tradition, and it's documented in history that we were a multidisciplinary society, and we valued it, and our educational institutions reflected it, right? So this is now, so the part early, so far it's sort of been very sort of emotion driven and, our outlook driven kind of approach. This now says that comes to the data, that it is not just that we think it's a great thing, but we happen to know based on data that multidisciplinary education is a good thing. And how do we know that? So this is that addressing that point. Assessments of educational approaches have consistently shown positive learning outcomes, including increased creativity and innovation, critical thinking and higher order thinking capacities, problem-solving abilities, teamwork, communication skills, more in-depth learning, and mastery of curricula across fields, increases in social and moral awareness, etc., besides general engagement and enjoyment in learning. Research is also improved and enhanced through a holistic and multidisciplinary education. So there is some data to support this. This is not just a feel-good kind of transformation when we talk about going to a multidisciplinary approach. And of course, they go on to say that, so again, they emphasize both the holistic and multidisciplinary aspect of education, and it helps human beings. How does it help human beings? And such an education will help develop well-rounded individuals that possess critical capacities in fields across the arts, humanities, languages, sciences, social sciences, and professional, technical, and vocational fields. Pretty much everybody, I think, is captured here. If anybody is missing, let me know, but I think it basically means everybody will be better off, right? So, I mean, the question would be, why not do it? And we'll come to the answers also in a while. So next is, in the long term, such an education, this approach for all undergraduate programs, including in professional, technical, and vocational disciplines, this is where we want to head to, right? And when they've also defined the long term and the short term, and we'll come to that in a minute. But what are some of the characteristics, right? How do we actually implement a multidisciplinary education? Let's talk about that a little bit. So flexibility in curriculum and novel and engaging course options will be on offer to students, in addition to rigorous specialization in a subject or subjects. And this will be encouraged by increased faculty and institutional autonomy in setting curricula. So in a certain sense, what they are saying here, let me paraphrase it, is that ideally regulatory authorities should be playing a smaller role now. Whether the regulatory authorities see it that way or not is not clear, but this is the implication of this, which is in a certain sense necessary, because you will need to tweak things at the local level and not necessarily always at the global level. And that's why this is necessary. But it's also a challenge to implement it across the nation. So another point for discussion for later, but let's keep moving. So the goal is not just to transform the existing education, but to actually establish new educational institutions, which will be sort of role models for all of us to follow. So these will be model public universities for holistic and multidisciplinary education at par with the IITs, IIMs, etc. So let's say LNMITs here, called MERUs, Multidisciplinary Education and Research Universities, will be set up and will aim to attain the highest global standards in quality education. Right? So this is a commitment of the National Education Policy, and there is also a time-bound goal that I will come to in a minute. So HEIs will focus on research and innovation by setting up startup incubation centers, technology development centers, centers in frontier areas of research, greater industry academic linkages, and interdisciplinary research, including humanities and social sciences research. So you'll recognize that we've already at LNMIT started making efforts in many of these directions, if not all. And indeed, so this just validates our approach, so to speak. But also, the entire nation will be headed in this direction. So we'll have company if we don't already have. Then comes the question about the timelines. So the NEP, again, this is the NEP's timeline. By 2040, all higher educational institutions shall aim to become multidisciplinary institutions and shall aim to have large student enrollments, preferably in the thousands, for the optimal use of infrastructure and resources and for the creation of vibrant multidisciplinary communities. And since this process will take time, all HEIs will firstly plan to become multidisciplinary by 2030 and then gradually increase student strength. So in a certain sense, what is being said here is that ideally the National Education Policy wants us to be moving in two directions. One is in the direction of larger size as measured by student numbers, and the other is in terms of multidisciplinary nature of the institution. And indeed, their emphasis is clear that what they want here is priority to multidisciplinarity over size, right? So first, they want us all to become multidisciplinary within a decade. And then within 2 decades, they want us all to be large multidisciplinary education institutions. And here is the kicker. So those who fail to adapt shall perish is what is said here. Single stream HEIs will be phased out over time, right? So if you refuse to move in this multidisciplinary vision as laid out by the NEP, then you will become obsolete and cease to exist, right? So how do single stream HEPs adapt? They will in particular add departments across different fields, right? So the next thing is, so that was what each institution should be doing. The now overall, how do the institutions collaborate with each other? The overall higher education sector will aim to be an integrated higher education system, including professional and vocational education. And this policy and its approach will be equally applicable to all HEIs across all current streams, which would eventually merge into one coherent ecosystem of higher education. So now a little bit about the current situation and how it's going to change. So first, where the vision is, and it's consistent with what is going on worldwide. Universities worldwide mean a multidisciplinary institution of higher learning. And the present complex nomenclature of HEIs in the country, such as deemed to be university, affiliating technical university, unitary university, shall all be replaced simply by university on fulfilling the criteria as per the norms. Right. So this is where we are all supposed to be heading under the National Educational Program. So it's good to be aware of it, and it's good to see, how we can sort of dovetail with the vision that is there and is being discussed. So, okay, so now I want to turn, so that's sort of, the excerpts from the NEP document itself I've concluded. What I now want to turn to is sort of the discussion piece of it, where I'll sort of try to make a first few quick points from my side, and then I'll open the floor for discussions. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing from all of you regarding your reactions to what has just been presented, and also your thoughts on these and related issues, right? So, I mean, just to structure the discussion, here are a few questions that I think if we can try to answer in our discussions, it will be good. First is, what does all of this mean for us? How do we become more multidisciplinary? What restructuring do we need to do and then how do we need to change our curriculum, right? So this is all pertaining to us as LNMIT in the context of this multidisciplinary focus of the national education policy. And then some partial quick thoughts from my side on, a few minimum things that I think we need to do. And then I'll open up the floor for more creative and more in-depth and insightful discussion from your side. So first of all, I believe that multidisciplinary approach will require strong fundamentals. And in particular, this may require a greater emphasis on the core curriculum. This also a greater emphasis on outside discipline electives. And also we have to make the students realize the value of a multidisciplinary education. So that's like the quick short list of what I think is absolutely essential and what we cannot get away with. So just a few sort of little bit of expansion on each one of these points, and then I'll quit from my side and I'll open up the floor. So first of all, why is it that the multidisciplinary approach requires strong fundamentals? See, when you are dealing with a complex problem, you need to be able to sort of span the entire set of domains that that problem spans, and you need to be able to go back to the fundamentals and then relate the fundamentals across disciplines. So, so when, in a certain sense, when you are working inside a silo or inside one discipline, you can be very deep and you can be working at the cutting edge, and you're so far deep and into the state of the art that the fundamentals are far away behind you. So it's almost taken for granted, and it doesn't necessarily play always a minute-to-minute role in what you're doing. But whereas when you are dealing with multidisciplinary situations, minute to minute, you'll need to be thinking of the fundamentals, and you'll need to be spanning from one domain to another, and you need to be able to translate across domains. And so it is imperative, in my opinion, inescapable that the students have very strong fundamentals when they're dealing with multidisciplinary domains. And in particular, that means that the core curriculum needs to play a much more important role. I mean, actually, over the years, I was an undergraduate at IIT Kanpur, and there, the first 2 years were core years, meaning only fundamentals were being taught. And then after that, the next 2 years or 3 years, depending upon your discipline, you went in and did your specific discipline-specific knowledge, right? And in fact, if you ask people from my generation, what was and who have been using their knowledge for the last few decades, and they've been using it, if they've been using it in a multidisciplinary domain, they will tell you that it is the core knowledge, the core years, that was the far more important, because the other stuff keeps changing very fast. So that's one aspect. I know that there can be there can be a diversity of opinion on that, but this is my belief, and I'm sure I'm sharing it, though I'm open to other viewpoints. And then, of course, this greater emphasis on outside discipline electives goes without saying. If you want a multidisciplinary approach, you have to have an understanding outside your discipline, and so that it cannot be just fulfilling graduation requirements that people do outside disciplinary initiative. And that brings me to the trickiest point and the tickliest point, which is the point about make the student realize the value of a multidisciplinary education. See, one could argue in many ways that what we are doing is not so far from what is needed. I mean, we do want to emphasize whether they should do a few more courses or they should do a few more outside disciplinary electives. It's debatable. But where is it that our current emphasis is failing, in my opinion? It is because students and their parents at the current time do not necessarily fully value a multidisciplinary education. And I would argue one cannot even blame them for that at this point in time. Why? Okay, so we all know that the vast majority of students, at least at an undergraduate level, say that, okay, tell me what my pay package is going to be once I graduate, and I'll tell you whether I want to do what you are offering me. And then second after that is, okay, so tell me how what you're teaching me is going to help me get that high pay package, right? There's nothing wrong with, that pragmatic approach. I will confess it is not necessarily my approach towards education, but the vast majority of people out there take that approach. And I have to admit there's nothing wrong per se with that approach. So what needs to happen for the parents, for the students to value multidisciplinary education? In my opinion, what needs to happen is that in the workplace out there needs to be a value for multidisciplinary education. And I know that, that we are discussing the national education policy, and our primary goal is really to confine to what can we do at LNMIT, and by all means we should focus on that. But see, we can be perfect in our delivery of multidisciplinary education, and I think with effort we can be. But if the students do not value it, we all are familiar with the phrase, you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make him or her drink it. And that applies as well to this point as to any other point. So if there are opportunities outside once they graduate for employment, which value multidisciplinary, which, let me be blunt, give them a higher pay package than if they're getting a single domain education, then they will value it. And so here, since this is talking about national education policy, I would humbly submit that the national education policy, if it is to succeed, needs to talk not just about educational institutions, but what is out there in terms of the industry and the employment opportunities for our students. We have, unfortunately, since independence, when we first started out, yes, we did the government of India did make investments in public sector units. We have made investments on the private sector side. There is a thriving stock market and very wealthy individuals. But if I look at gaps, so let me be frank. On the software side, I think we have done very well. And we can go into the factors for that. But since it's doing well, why should we spend more time on that? It's doing well. Let's, continue that and let's keep doing that well. Where are we not doing that well, in my opinion? It's in all of the engineering fields, and for that matter, physics, maths, other than computer science. Because the opportunities for students in those areas is very small, right? So at the end of the day, our MME and ECE graduates, the vast majority of them, I know some of them, many of them find excellent opportunities within their domain, and God bless them, right? And even God bless those who find their jobs inside the software industry. It's not their fault that they're put in that place, in that situation. So if we want multidisciplinary education to succeed in India, we need to make the investments in the industries. I'll name a few, and there's many. The hardware industry, the semiconductor industry, however you want to state it. A large fraction of our imports are in the television, computer, smartphone, so you name it. So those industries in India are, it is fair to say, at the best at nascent stage. We have not made the investment in that on the private sector side, and we cannot, force anybody on the private sector side to make investments, but we can at least entreat the government to look into this, since this is part of the national education policy and its implications, to make the necessary investments in the infrastructure that will support multidisciplinary education. Without that, we could have a wonderful higher educational system that performs and imparts excellent multidisciplinary educations. Students may not necessarily, come to the lectures on the other stuff outside their, the domains that get them the paychecks they need. Or if they come, they may not be engaged. So that is why we need this extra piece. But anyway, I know that my time for this session is only till 12:30. And I do know that many of you will have many more valuable points to make, more valuable than me. So with that, I want to turn it over to all of you. And I request your inputs.
If I may ask a question, more of a kind of general inquiry, and you may respond to it, anyone else participating could probably respond to that as well. In the entire set of changing things as we see, and even if we have to really appreciate the value of a multidisciplinary setting, as quite rightly pointed out both in the NEP document and by you, that probably strong fundamentals in certain areas and an early exposure would probably add a lot of value. Is it not about time that instead of remaining exposure to a very narrow set of things, the way our current BTech curricula in many of the cases does expose students in the first 2 years specifically, for example, complete elimination of the areas or at least the possibilities of students to choose from areas like biology, at least at the introductory level, chemistry, right? Probably a few areas picked from the liberal arts domain kind of thing. Would this not be a good idea to probably go back to some extent in the thought process of the new curricular structuring exercise that we would have an opportunity to do, to see whether this broad base could be brought back in a way which does not completely throw away some of the good things that current structure does provide us, but at the same time does allow at least adequately wider set of say courses to provide a good initial base and or exposure, so that people could appreciate later when two of these disciplines, or say computer science and biology, come together, or when say social science and another discipline does come together, or biology and mathematics come together, kind of things. There are many other combinations possible. Because what happens is that when we get into silos, saying that we are into computer science and engineering, and these are the only subjects required for computer science and engineering guys to learn from, or we are in ECE or MME, and these are the only subjects we need to learn when it needs to probably move towards our discipline area, probably is a little too narrowing down the way we could learn, and that real appreciation would not come at an early stage unless an initial exposure, which will be of course difficult to sail through, because many of the young generation students would need to be probably helped to understand what value does it have it for them in future. But would it not be a right time for us to look back and try to see, learn, and probably unlearn a little open up, add a little bit of more courses in our fundamental bucket of courses at the early level, though they could choose it at a later stage, but choosing at the early level, that exposure will allow them to choose appropriate electives which are at the intersection of the two or more of these areas. So that early appreciation would be possible only when in one of the early 2 years they get an exposure. Even if it's a 1 unit course or 1 credit course or 2 credit course, I'm not saying what it should be, but probably a little broader set of topics and subjects as in the basket. Would that not be a good idea, or is there a better idea that you or any other learned colleague or a student whosoever is participating can think of?
So let me share my perspective, and then of course, I would love to hear from other people on their viewpoint. So first of all, my viewpoint is that for sure, yes, the broader their perspective, and therefore, the broader the course, so to speak, including things like biology, for example, that you mentioned, and others, which, probably a set of colleagues needs to sit down and look at what the future is going to be, and what, how do we train our students. So I am completely, I do completely agree that we need a broader core curriculum, and with broader emphasis across disciplines. And in a certain sense, of course, let me also point out the limitations, because as you and many of our other colleagues will also be wondering that, there is no free lunch, so to speak, and anything we add in breadth, we have to sacrifice in depth. So my personal take on that is that for at least the vast majority of our students, we should probably emphasize breadth over depth. There are some students who probably want to go on, deep into one domain, and that has its value too. But I mean, but that's where, so there needs to be a balance, what I'm saying. But yeah, if I was to err, I would prefer to err on the broad side rather than on the, other side.
Well, can I add a sentence here, Anupam?
Of course, please, sir.
See, you have emphasized, and very rightly so, the multidisciplinary approach, and which the NEP, of course, does very vigorously talk about. Right? And that's very true. It's very true. It has paid dividends. You are a witness, at least in the audience, and others also would be a witness in the audience, to the multidisciplinary approach that has been followed in many of the IITs, and particularly IIT-K, about which I'm very, very familiar. Right? I know about other IITs also, they have also followed. We at IIT-K did follow right from 1960 or 1958, when Professor Kelkar came as the founder director. And what the emphasis was at that point in time, look at 70, 80 years, 60 years older, right, story, the science-based engineering education. Technology was not that much there at that point in time, but he emphasized science-based engineering. And you had 5 years of BTech at that point in time, and we have also taught 5 years of BTech till 1985 and all that. And you had lot many courses in the first 2 years. It was 5-year program of BTech in engineering. It was 2 plus 3, 2 years of your institute core, and which you are aware of, and 3 years of professional stream. And let me tell you, it was not just 3 years of professional stream, like whether you're in CSE or aeronautical engineering, aerospace, or mechanical engineering, or chemical engineering, or material science engineering, right? Any engineering you were, but there were many electives also, right? At that point in time. So multidisciplinary did come through, not only through your institute core, which was 2 years at that time, which became 3 semesters when it got converted into 4-year program, somewhere in 84 or 85, I don't recall correctly, 85, I guess, right? The 5-year program was converted into 4-year program. And that time also, it was 3 semesters versus your 5 semesters, right? 3 semesters of institute core and 5 semesters of professional stream and all. And in that also you see that there was this multidisciplinary approach. And I believe that many IITs, I'm not sure of NITs, they were regional engineering colleges at that point in time. NITs came much later, maybe about 2 decades ago. They have also now probably remodeled themselves, and they have the mainstream, right? But multidisciplinary is a very welcome step. It has been going on in the country, in at least IITs, but I'm not sure of it. See, what I'm talking about, I was just wondering to see the have and have-nots vis-a-vis NEP 2020, have and have-nots, right? I agree, I fully agree that multidisciplinary, I would put it in have-nots, not in haves. In have-nots across the country, because many of the institutes in the country, there were many private institutes and even some public institutes, which are state colleges and all that, didn't have this multidisciplinary approach, or might not be having even still. So that is where, of course, that thing comes into force. One is through the main core, the other is through the electives. And if we come to LNMIT, because you referred in your slides the LNMIT as well, what I find here is, to the extent of our abilities, right, present abilities I'm just talking about, right, we need to expand on that. We need to expand both horizontally and vertically. We have been telling that for many years now, in order to qualify us as a full-fledged university, right? And we need to expand. But certainly we shall do that in due course of time. But even now, I would say, to the extent of our abilities we have, right, we I think do follow this dictum of NEP. I will not call it a dictum, I will call it a requirement. It's certainly a requirement of the times. The multidisciplinary approach is one of the things which, of course, certainly needs to be done. And we are, to some extent, following it here, but not fully. I would say why not fully? Because our system, the curriculum that I have seen here, at the core level, it's I would say, because it has been borrowed from somewhere. It has been borrowed from IITs and some part of it from IITK initially, and then later on there have been changes. But what I find is that what is lacking still is the electives that we are not able to offer in our professional stream, right? That's multidisciplinary approach will come from electives as well, right? So leave aside the first 3 semesters, right? Which constitutes your maths, physics, humanities, and all. Right? Of course, there could have been some other science-based chemistry you have studied. Now, in fact, you have biosciences, bioengineering, also a part of your core curriculum in IITK and all that. I mean, see, these are the various kinds of, you have different streams, which one could sort of have some basic knowledge. You talked about fundamentals. Yes, these are the fundamentals which were spawned in the core program, and you were a witness. You are a witness to that, and you see the rigor that did follow in the core program, and as well in the professional program as well. So that is where, of course, what I feel is we are partly there. We are partly there. Maybe we don't have other science disciplines like chemistry. We don't have biosciences and all that, which would have been added feather in our cap and all that. But maybe in due course of time. But my concern is more towards electives, because our students, particularly undergrad students, are sort of deprived, are literally starving for good electives, which are emerging areas and all that, right? In some of the disciplines. So that's where, of course, one. I mean, what I'm trying to see this in NEP 2020. My concern, my personal concern, is what NEP envisages, right? And what LNM IIT. See, my concern is the global, no doubt about that. But my concern is right now local. I would like to see what is that in NEP 2020, which is not in LNM IIT. So have and have nots. And I would say multidisciplinary to the extent of our resources, the abilities and competences and all that, we do have. We do have, but we need to expand on that. It doesn't mean that we are completely satisfied with that. We need to even I would go to the larger extent, whether in even the core, whether we need to teach what we are teaching right now. That's the basic thing, because that can also be a debate, right? That would be a debate on that also, right? But by and large, I would say, I mean, engineering education. We're not talking of liberal arts. We're not talking of your medicine, or we're not talking of management here. We're not talking of other disciplines which could be and which should be, of course, in this institute as well. Maybe they will come in another 10 years of time and so on and so forth. But I'm just talking of engineering and technology, right? That multidisciplinary approach, which is science-based, is there. It has to be strengthened further. We have to foster more, reinforce some more concrete in this program, so as to make it, as I said, that electives is one, to my mind, at the moment, that electives we need to look at very carefully, particularly in engineering disciplines, and the basic core that we have for 3 semesters. So that's all from me, because I'm just looking at from the perspective of LNM IIT, because I know many of the institutes in the country, CFTIs, even NITs also. I have been to so many NITs, particularly when they became NITs in the last 20 years. I know their curriculum, I know their programs and all that. They have adopted to a larger extent, right? And they're following the structure that we're having this. And multidisciplinary is a very, very welcome step, and this needs to be reinforced. And we should be very much forthcoming in implementing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insights based on your rich experience.
May I suggest that some younger colleagues also, probably we invite them to participate, because we need ideas from everyone. Questions, having a practice of good inquiry is very healthy. So if it is possible, if there are questions that some of the other colleagues and some of the younger colleagues, of course, experienced colleagues are always welcome. But apart from that, I thought that we would all love to hear something from younger colleagues too.
Yeah, I think Dr. Mohit Gupta raised a hand in between. He wanted to share something. Dr. Mohit Gupta, you may please go ahead.
Okay, sir. So this is Mohit speaking. So I have not read NEP, but as you mentioned few things, I had few questions. So
Sure.
as you said, there is a challenge to implement it in India. So one challenge is how to give incentive to student to study multidisciplinary. This is one thing.
Correct.
And second challenge is societal challenge, because Europe and other countries have gone through European Enlightenment, and so many other things have happened there, and they are naturally driven by curiosity. And India, this thing has not happened yet. So how we are going to overcome this challenge? Because right now we don't have monetary incentive. And second incentive is natural curiosity, which is there in Europe due to the historical reasons, like European Enlightenment, and so many things has happened over there. So how NEP address this challenge, where the society has to be evolved, or what I feel, that kind of enlightenment is not here yet. So I don't have.
So Mohit, those are excellent questions. So let me share my thoughts on those, and of course, I would welcome thoughts from you as well as others on this. See, the first part we already talked about in terms of the commercial aspect and the industry and the job market. The second aspect of it, we very rightly pointed out, is the societal aspect about valuing multidisciplinarity, valuing curiosity, which is you're absolutely right, at the core of a successful multidisciplinary endeavor. right? And in my opinion, to cut the chase, that has to be at the parent-child level. Let me put it this way, because that curiosity, has to be encouraged at the parent-child level. And one, when they're little kids. Second, as and when the kid is looking for their opportunities in life, you know not to curtail that okay, only be looking for profession X, Y, or Z, whatever those professions. I mean, historically there was good reason for doing that. I'm not saying that this was an irrational thing. Historically, when we first came into the post-colonial era, you could only make a decent living in certain professions, and we can all understand that no parent wants their kid to suffer in any way. I believe today that is not the case. I believe today, if you're good at what you're doing in India, you will find a reasonable life. Let me put it this way, and most probably a happy life. But it is a fear on the part of the parents that maybe our kid is not going to be happy unless he plays the safe route. So that's the other part of it. So you're right. I mean, one is the industry and job opportunities need to be there, and the second piece of it is that the parents need to be a little more forward-looking. But that's easier said than done. I mean, we are all of us who are parents, we are very protective, and unless we are 100% sure that things are going to work out, obviously, we are not going to give in that easily. Let me put it this way. But I think until that happens, all the propaganda from me, you, NEP, and anybody else is not really going to change the reality on the ground. That's my take.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Subrat raised the hand. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I have 2 points basically. One is on multidisciplinary education. So if help me understand this particular phrase when we are saying multidisciplinary education. Is it that by adding couple of courses in the curriculum, which may come from a wide range of areas, we can make the program a multidisciplinary, or it is the ecosystem, that means the multidisciplinary environment that the students need to be exposed to? And if it is a institute with a limited vision and mission, probably a multidisciplinary environment might not be possible, and the students may not be able to get an exposure to that environment in a multidisciplinary sense. But if it is restricted to a couple of courses, then probably any institute will be able to achieve that with due diligence. And the second point that I wanted to focus is probably it is also true from the point of view of any institute to ponder upon why at all they have a program in the institute. Like, for example, we have a couple of programs, so why at all we have a BTech program? Why at all we have, let's say, a MTech program? So probably it is also true that we should think behind the scene that why at all we created this? What is that we wanted to achieve out of this particular program? Is it that the students will be able to get a good package or a good job after completing the program? Or we are thinking that probably we'll be able to meet the current demand of the industry, and that's why we have created a program? Or we want the program to satisfy the current need of the society? And if we say current need of the society, then probably we are targeting something big and which may require a multidisciplinary approach. Or it is that we have something niche in our program and we want that particular unique goal should be fulfilled when we are launching this particular program. So probably that requires a debate or a thinking, as well as I'm a bit more looking into the definition of this multidisciplinary education.
Okay, so let me take a first crack at it, and then of course I'll open it up for everybody else. I do recognize the time is also short, so I'll keep my part short. So first of all, what do we mean by multidisciplinarity? I mean, let me put it this way. multidisciplinarity is not just say you have some courses A plus some courses B plus some courses C, and just the fact that you have some courses A plus some courses B plus some courses C which are in different disciplines, that automatically makes it multidisciplinary. At least not in the way I like to think about it. Something is multidisciplinary whether the individual is able to move back and forth between the disciplines as per the need, right? So if there is a problem that requires you to be thinking about simultaneously 3 or 4 disciplines, that you have the capability of doing that, that is what multidisciplinarity is, in my opinion. So in a certain sense, from our perspective, yes, it does involve adding more courses, but I don't think it stops there. The second piece, was, so you had actually 4 or 5 questions, so let me sort of abbreviate my answer to the most important one of them, which was, are we doing it for industry? Are we doing it for society? Are we doing it for us? Are we doing it for the institution? In my opinion, some document like the NEP implies that we are doing it for at least the country, if not the world. Let's keep it limited. Let's keep it, say, country and society. So that's the goal. Of course, as I alluded to earlier, it does involve, some give and take, in the sense that you cannot put all of the burden, in my opinion, on the educational institutions to, to do this, because it does require changes in the society outside, as we just discussed in the answer to the previous question. So with that, and knowing that we are short of time, so to speak, I'm over my allocated time, I will stop there. I know that you have many more questions. I'm always open for more discussion and debate, either informally or if the institute chooses a formal setting later on, I'll be happy to be a part of that. But with that, given that I'm over my time, I want to thank everybody for their patience and for their interest, and for so many interesting comments, insights, and questions also. So thank you all. And with that, I hand it back to Dr. Nikhil.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your talk and highlighting an important aspect of NEP 2020, that is the institutional restructuring and multidisciplinary education, followed by, we can say, highly intellectual discussion points as well. And also the special mention goes to the beginning of your talk, the poem that you recited of great Rabindranath Tagore. That was really interesting and motivational. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. So I think now we can call upon the last speaker for today's session, Dr. Gaurav Chatterjee, who will be delivering the talk on the topic, student support and equity in the higher education.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Nikhil, for this opportunity and organizing this wonderful webinar series. So now a little bit of a challenge here is I'm going to be using 2 devices. So this device, I'm going to be talking on the video camera, whereas my slides are going to be on another device. So I would really hope if somebody could give me feedback if it's visible. Okay.
Yes, your slides are visible now.
Wonderful. All right. All right. So as Professor Banerjee in his inaugural talk and Professor Gorthi has already given us a very good idea about what NEP is. The NEP actually is a 67-70 page document which tries to orient different stratas of education, different stakeholders of the education sector, and tries to solve certain problems. Well, it doesn't solve them per se, but it tries to give some recommendations and some policies which might help us reach those problems. So if you try to look inside the NEP document, there are in all around 25-30 points, and a couple of interesting points have been given to me, and they will be the subject of today's talk. So those 2 points are student support and equity and inclusion. So we will be discussing these in quite a bit of detail. And okay. So first of all, why are we here? We are here to spread awareness of this NEP 2020 policy, which is a very interesting document, as the previous speakers have already said. To discuss the logic and motivation of the unique points which are mentioned in the policy. As I said, there are around 25-30 unique points which are mentioned. So we need to discuss what is the logic and motivation behind it. And after understanding them, we need to understand how to adopt them in our particular application field. We fall under the HEIs, which is higher education institutions. So how can we adopt some of those policies to attain the goals that the government has? Okay. So having said that, let me just summarize what is today's agenda for my talk. First talk is we will be covering the NEP 2020 in brief. I will not be spending a lot of time on this because the previous speakers have already mentioned a lot about it. Okay. Then the next 2 discussion points are the 2 specific policy points that have been given to me, which is the student support and the equity and inclusivity. We will be going a bit deeper into the policy motivation and directives that the policy document has given us about the optimal learning environments and all the different types of student supports that can be provided to uplift the student education. Then point number 6 and 14 are about equity and inclusivity. These seem like a bit difficult and heavy words, and they are a bit misleading. Honestly speaking, when this topic was allotted to me and when I looked at equity, immediately my brain went towards mutual funds. There's an equity there, and I started thinking, okay, maybe the policy document is talking about how we can create a fund and how the economics part of it. But boy, was I wrong when I started reading the policy document. So there are a lot of misconceptions that will be cleared, a few concepts which will be given to some of my colleagues who might not know what these words exactly mean. And then what recommendations is the policy document is giving to each HEI about achieving the goals of equity and inclusivity. That is something we will be discussing about. Finally, what I will be doing is, although the discussion will be thrown open to all the experts to talk about, I will be trying to highlight 3 or 4 key discussion points which might help us have a more fruitful discussion about this particular topic of the NEP policy. So let's start with the NEP 2020 in brief. What the NEP 2020 is all about. Whenever we try to, or the government tries to set a policy, it is basically to solve a problem. So definitely there has to be a problem which the government is trying to solve. And government, in its very standard fashion, it doesn't really give a solution. It gives us a set of policies that we might follow and which might have a solution to the problem. So that brings us to the problem. What is the problem that we are trying to address? What is the problem that this policy is trying to address? In fact, this is not a single policy. This policy has evolved over a course of 50 years, and there have been 3 or 4 very major iterations. So obviously there was some problem they tried to solve. They couldn't, they came up with one more policy they tried to solve, and this kept on repeating. So let's try to look at what are the problems that they were trying to solve. First problem we need to understand is, this problem is not unique to our country. This problem is there globally everywhere. As Mark Twain has properly said, very popularly said, that I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. So that means we need to fundamentally understand that literacy and education are 2 completely different topics, completely different ideologies. And unfortunately, our country has become very proficient in making a lot of, or producing a truckload of uneducated literates. We are having people who are literates. That means we are having people who can speak, who can read, who can talk, who can sign, but they are not educated. And when we try to look at some other strata of the society, for example, like our uneducated, so-called uneducated farmers, well, they are not uneducated. They are actually illiterates, but they are probably more educated than us. So this is a fundamental problem that we have in our current schooling system. And this problem is there everywhere. It is exemplified by this particular idea. A student is subjected to 10 to 12 years of schooling. We know that we have all come out from the 10+2 system. After that, what happens? We are made to sit into certain entrance exams. So what this means is the entrance exams are a way of telling the schooling system that we don't trust your assessment. We don't trust the way you have been taught. We don't trust the information that has been given to you. You are inadequate. So this is clearly a problem. How can one particular exam, and what it has led to is a huge economic industry of coaching classes and everything, where students have to invest more money to cater themselves to that particular part where they need to prepare for the entrance exams. So clearly we have got a problem. Okay. So having understood what are the different problems that we have, let's go into a very brief history of NEP, although I will not spend a lot of time here. I think Professor Gorthi did go into this a bit. So the seeds of the national education policy was sown by Jawaharlal Nehru. And well, what problem he was trying to fix? All the problems. He was starting from a blank slate, basically. So he had nothing to start with. In 1961, he introduced the NCERT. He brought it into commission. Then in 1964, Lal Bahadur Shastri, he formed the Kothari Commission. And the Kothari Commission was actually a very elaborate commission. If you have some time, I would suggest later on you should read about it. So the Kothari Commission actually had international experts from 20 different countries and to frame the first comprehensive educational policy of the country. A lot of those policy documents or policies were adopted into the bill, and they were introduced in 1968 by the Indira Gandhi government. A couple of salient features of that NEP policy, NEP 1968 as it is called, were the 3-language policy. So the 3 languages that were chosen were English, Hindi, and the regional language. And although there were good motivations behind that, it came into a lot of issues also. And they also increased the government spending to 6% of GDP. Okay. So after this, in 1986, there was the first complete rehaul of the policy by the Rajiv Gandhi government, and they focused on equality and diversity. Basically, SC/ST quotas and the different status of the society, socio-economically disadvantaged groups, they were all brought into the policy, and certain efforts were taken to uplift them into the education sector. Moving on, now we come to the present era. The next small iteration was done in 1992. Then NEP 1986, which was introduced by Rajiv Gandhi, was modified by the PV Narasimha government. And this government introduced the common entrance exams. So as an analogy, if you understand that we are talking about the problem of heart blockage in the arteries, the probable solution is a bypass surgery. That is what they did. They did not, instead of addressing the problem why the arteries are getting clogged up, they gave us a solution of a completely roundabout, going roundabout and introducing different entrance exams for that. Maybe it solved some issues, but it also gave rise to further issues. Now, all these NEPs till now, they have spoken about equality, they have spoken about diversity, but a few of the other topics, especially like globalization of Indian education system, and the basic idea that our education system till this point, in fact, even till today, is based on the British system. It is borrowed from the British education system. So we have just taken pointers from the British, whereas we have moved far away from our ancestral Gurukul type of teaching. And this is what the current NEP talks about. The current NEP 2020 tries to revamp the old NEP, and it gives greater emphasis to the preschooling. It tries to move from the 10+2 system to 5+3+3 system, and it actually presents a very big policy shift towards a more holistic and a creative education environment. Now that we know from where we started and where we are right now, the NEP 2020 is in a nutshell is this. Now this slide is a very interesting slide that I got from one of the talks given by the Institute Chair of IIT Bombay in chemical engineering. So he has very beautifully summarized the new education system and education policy as proposed by the NEP 2020 document in a nutshell. Although this basically deals with the preschooling and the pre-higher education part of the curriculum. So I will not really be going much into that. But the major takeaway point from this is we are trying to take inspiration from our ancestral Gurukul days with the goal of making India an attractive global destination for education. So we want to become the Vishwa Guru, and we want to teach the world, proudly showcase our way of system rather than following a system that we have inherited from the British. So that is the major flavor of the NEP 2020 and the motivation behind it. So I tried to summarize three key points to come out from the NEP 2020. The first is focus on critical thinking rather than the rote way of learning that the students have been subjected to till now. The second key point is global integration of Indian education system. I think Professor Gorthi and Professor Anupam Singh, they mentioned a bit about it, about how can we showcase our education system even through multidisciplinary educations and attract more global students to provide more visibility to our education system and be proud of it. That is what this NEP 2020 is trying to achieve. The third thing is to increase the GER. Now, there are a lot of acronyms in this policy document. The GER stands for Gross Enrollment Ratio. It basically tells you how many students have enrolled into a particular program. That is what the Gross Enrollment Ratio says. In the page 3 of this document, there is a specific line which defines that the pedagogy, it must evolve to make education more experiential instead of the more rote-based system, holistic and integrated and learner-centered, and a few other points also. So this line very beautifully summarizes the whole motivation of this policy. How we are supposed to change our radically change our way of teaching, thought process. And one problem or one issue with a lot of talks and a lot of discussions with which usually happen in regarding this NEP 2020 is they tend to think it is completely student oriented, but they completely forget that it is not just about the students. It is a policy document for all the stakeholders. So it affects the way it tries to affect the way how HEIs also perform. HEI is the high education institutions, how the teaching should happen, how the counseling should happen. It looks at all these different status of teaching. Now, if you try to do a post-mortem of this document in draft version was 484 pages. And as we know, with 400, 500 page policy documents, they become very glorified pillows. So instead of trying to make them glorified pillows, it is better to come up with a concise document. So the government came up with a concise document of 67 pages. This NEP 2020 is of 67 pages, out of which 27 pages are dedicated only to school education. So that is almost 50% of the policy is concentrated on the school education. And the reason for that is, when you try to look at the gross enrollment ratio as the indicator parameter of the state of health of the education system, what we find is, if a particular student is making it till the 12th standard, more often than not, he will end up being in a higher education system. The issue that our country is facing is our students are dropping out during the journey to 12th standard. So primarily this NEP 2020 document tries to address that. and tries to increase the gross enrollment ratio. And by doing that, it tries to reduce the dropout rates. So we will be discussing a bit on that, about how the government is trying to do that. The next 17 pages of the document talk about policies which are specifically adhering towards higher education. So that is going to be our primary focus. So specifically 2 points in the higher education system. And finally, the last 12 pages are for other areas like adult education and other things. Okay. So having known what the NEP 2020 document is about, let me introduce you this talk. What are we going to primarily talk about in this talk? The 2 topping points, or the 2 policy points that are given to me, are policy point number 12, which is to deal up with optimal learning environments, OLEs as they call it, and student support in higher education. So we will be spending 5 or 10 minutes to discuss the policy point number 12. And the second policy point is actually a combination of 2 points, policy 6 and policy 14. Strictly speaking, policy point number 6 is adhering to primary education, to school education. However, they both talk about equity and inclusion, and the idea and the ethos of both these points are exactly same. So I chose to talk about both of the points together because the ideas are pretty much intermingling over there. So having said that, let's start with the first policy point: optimal learning environments and student support. So the policy document first starts with identifying what are the key cornerstones for quality learning. The first policy point, or the cornerstone, is curriculum itself. The second is the pedagogy, how to deliver that curriculum effectively to the students. The next cornerstone is continuous assessment. How do we assess continually within different pedagogical schemes and scenarios, and how to keep it fair, how to keep it consistent. These are certain challenges, and the policy document does talk about it. And the fourth cornerstone of quality learning as per the NEP 2020 is the student support. So the policy tells you, or tells us, that towards, or the path towards quality learning is built on these 4 specific fundamentals. So let's discuss each of those 4 parts into a bit detail. First is curriculum itself. The policy, what it says is, all the HEIs will be given complete autonomy to design a curriculum that is academically and industrially relevant. This is very important. So we don't really have to follow a specific university structure. We have the autonomy as far as it is justifiable. Okay. So the policy document talks about giving all the higher education institutes complete autonomy regarding this. Next is the pedagogy itself. The HEIs are encouraged to innovate different forms of pedagogy and to ensure consistency across various platforms of online distance learnings. And in fact, the policy says that we should encourage ODL programs. ODL is online distance learning programs. So especially with the pandemic situation, this point got highlighted, and a lot of institutions have already moved towards this. The third pillar is assessment. The HEIs have the freedom to choose the assessment platform, and choice-based credit system will be encouraged with a final goal to move towards criterion-based grading system. So basically, students will be free to choose their particular majors or minors, and we have to facilitate them by giving them so many options. So the policy document identifies that the holistic environment, or the holistic growth of students, is very important. So the HEIs have to facilitate it by giving them those opportunities and by educating them of those opportunities, and giving them certain incentive to pursue those opportunities. So the incentive can be given by way of credits, can be given them by way of minors, for example, and they don't have to be, for example, we are a technical institution. So they don't really have to be technical based courses. They could be arts, they could be drama or astronomy and all that. So the document does talk about moving towards a more holistic growth. Finally, is the student support. The HEIs have to be committed towards the holistic development of the students, and they need to be proactive in creating strong internal systems for supporting diverse student cohorts in both academic and social domains. In fact, they left out the financial domain. Maybe that's a part of social domain only, but academically, socially, and financially, we have to support different diverse student cohorts. And according to the document, if the HEI could follow these, we would be right on the track towards encouraging quality learning. So what are some ways to support? How do we ensure holistic development of students from different various backgrounds? First is all the HEIs will have certain mechanisms and opportunities for funding clubs and activities, which we already have in LNMIT, like photography club or drama club. So the HEIs have to actively support, actively counsel students, and actively encourage them to be a part of these activities. We have to give them incentives. So over the time, such activities could be incorporated into the curriculum. By the way, these are not my words. These are the words of the policy document itself. I'm verbatim just copying them into the presentation. Students from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, as in the document it finds mention as SEDGs, they require more encouragement and more financial support to make a successful transition. So the policy document tries to give recommendations about how we can facilitate this. The HEIs will be encouraged to set up high quality counseling and support centers, and they will be given academic funds and academic resources. But they have left a big elephant in the room. They don't say who are going to provide these funds. So this elephant needs to be addressed. Where is the fund going to come from? Finally, the policy talks about different types of counseling, emotional, psychological, academic, and career well-being, which has to be made available to a lot of students. We know the sad scenario of the IITs with a lot of suicides which are happening, for example. So now most of those problems are because mental health, for example, depression is a kind of a taboo topic. So students don't feel happy enough to talk about or don't feel encouraged enough to seek help. So we have a solution, we have a problem. Unfortunately, the solution is provided only when the problem comes to the solution. So we have to figure out a way to bring the solution directly to the problem. So these could be probably done with counseling. It could be done with more workshops in which students will encourage to be more open and talk about. These are some things that we can talk about in the discussion. Finally, the major goal of this NEP document, one other major goal of this NEP document is to internationalize our education and to restore our Gurukul view of our role of being a Vishwaguru. So we need to facilitate student exchanges and we need to attract international students, and we could create a kind of an academic credit bank through which we can transfer credits easily between different institutions. And it talks about promoting Indian courses like Ayurveda, like yoga, Indian music, Indian arts and culture, history. All these are very special and very unique to our country. So we can market and project ourselves better in the international global market by forecasting these as our primary education areas. There should be an international student office in each HEI which should be hosting foreign students and so on. Basically, the document tries to tell us different ways by which we could encourage a learning atmosphere for students from other countries to come to our country and to study. We could even facilitate a credit sharing mechanism with foreign universities also. And in fact, there is a provision in the policy that in the future, top performing universities can open campuses abroad, and some of the universities from outside will be allowed to open campuses in our country. So this will improve and encourage more student exchange among different types of learning institutes. So that was mostly a brief summary about all the policy points that were there in the student support section. Now let's go into the equity and inclusivity, the second part of the talk, which are basically policy points number 6 and 14 in the policy document. This is a very popular picture, which I'm sure everybody has spoken. We try to provide equality and we try to be very proud of it. We are providing equal opportunity to everyone. But as Albert Einstein very popularly said, everybody is a genius, but if you try to judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, he will feel really stupid all his life. So that is basically the difference between equity and equality. So you can see in the left side, that is equality. The three people, they are not being bootstrapped properly, whereas on the right side, it is equity. So the onus is to identify the problems or the key points of each individual student and give them support accordingly. Sometimes an equal financial support over the strata of all the students is not a good idea. Sometimes maybe some students might need only 0.5x the support, somebody might need 2x the support. So these kind of things, they need to be debated about how we can do that, how we can provide equity. And this idea of equity was missing in the previous NEP documents. So this document, NEP 2020, tries to bring equity into the policy and tries to force this idea about how we can try to provide equity. The other idea that this document tries to address is the inclusivity. The Rajiv Gandhi NEP, it addressed the diversity by putting quotas for SC and ST and maybe certain upliftment programs, Operation Blackboard, and so on. But it did not talk about inclusivity. Now, what do these two terms mean exactly? Okay, so diversity is basically bringing different types of people, different types of skill sets into one plate, into one common plate. You can see this, I'm sure a lot of us are hungry now. So you will see this photo of a salad in which all the ingredients are there individually put there. It's looking very beautiful, but it is really not a salad. It can be a salad only if we include it into a cohesive unit, right? So this is the idea of inclusivity. You need to bring people on the board and you also need to empower them to speak up. So you need to bring them together and you need to make them feel that they belong. So that is the idea of inclusivity. So a good analogy that I thought about was diversity is like hum aapke tarah hain, we are like you. But we need to change the meaning of the like to we like you. So we like you is inclusivity. We are telling the person that, okay, you might be different, it doesn't matter. You bring your own skill set to the board and we appreciate it and we would encourage you to build it further. So that was the idea that was missing in the previous NEP documents, and this document tries to frame certain policies about how we can make it more inclusive. So the key step to understand inclusivity, the first step is to understand or recognize what is the diversity. What are the different types of students that we are talking about? And the policy document very nicely categorizes the types of students that we might encounter into these 5 broad categories. One is the gender itself, and with a particular focus on the female students and the transgender communities. The second classification is the socio-cultural, which is already very well documented and well in place, the SC, ST and the other minorities. The third classification is based on the geographical divide. Some students might be coming from small villages or small towns or even other states. In fact, my tenure in LMIT as a faculty, I have faced this issue of other state students. I have seen that they feel a bit reluctant in openly communicating with the faculty. And this is not just related to the medium of instruction. This is also related to the general environment that the student is in. When he goes to his hostel, he sees that all his students, all his colleagues are speaking in Hindi, for example. He's going to the shop, there also is Hindi, for example. So merely fixing the mode of instruction to a multilingual platform is not going to cut it. It might help alleviate the issue a bit, but it might not go all the way in solving this problem. This is something that we might talk about. The next category of students are with disabilities, different types of disabilities, physical health, mental health, for example. And finally, the category is socio-economic, low income households or the child beggars or orphans. How do we uplift these students into providing them with a good quality education? So these are the 5 specific categories that this NEP document has identified. So once we understand each of these categories, then the policy talks about how can we try to uplift each of these category by giving them certain benefits. Okay. And the major problem that the NEP document has identified is the problem of gross enrollment ratio. Okay. How do we increase the gross enrollment ratio, the GER? We do that by reducing the dropout rate. So first, let's understand what is the dropout rate or what are the statistics that we have. So according to UDICE, which is actually Unified District Information System for Education, it's like a common portal which consolidates all this data. About 20% of the students who belong to the SC or ST caste at the primary level, this falls by around 3% to around 17%. So you will see that 3% of the students are dropping out. And if this is just for a bird's eye view, if we try to do a post-mortem and go deeper inside and look at how many female students have dropped out, it is even starker. And let's not even get into the problem of higher education. From the first year to the 4th year, there is a massive dropout of students that we see, especially for the students from socio and economically disadvantaged groups that we discussed in the previous slide. So how do we fix it? The document tries to identify 4 or 5 key areas or key reasons why we are having these dropouts. The first dropout is lack of access to quality school due to poverty, due to societal customs, or due to language barriers. The next is a misconception. ये पढ़ के मेरा क्या होगा? Like that's the whole idea about, even the movie Swadesh talks about this point very well. The tribal communities, they find the school education to be very irrelevant. So they just don't want to spend any time or money towards educating their children in higher education. The third reason for dropouts, as the policy mentions, is the minority students or the minority groups that are present in each higher education institution. They lack inclusivity. They don't feel involved enough. So this was the key problem that this policy tries to fix. At least it acknowledges that, yes, this is a problem. We have looked at diversity and we have managed to uplift some of the SC and ST students to come into higher educations, but we have till now failed to keep them included. We have not managed to make them feel welcome and make them feel confident enough to continue their pursuit of higher education. So that is why we see a lot of dropout in this particular area. The policy also recognizes the importance of handicapped students. So by providing or improving policies, even acts related to children with special needs, even the Divyang policies, there are a lot of Divyang policies already introduced by the government, which tries to address the problem of disabled children. Finally, the document moves towards higher education. So all these were quite generic. Finally, for higher education, the document says that we identify that the problem is most stark in higher education, and in higher education to provide, there are unique set of problems like lack of knowledge of opportunities and poor employability. And to address them, we will need to go deeper and we will need to have or frame specific policies only for higher education. And that is what the policy document actually does. So these are the recommendations that the policy has given. It's divided in 2 parts. One is a set of recommendations that the policy has given to the document, to the government, which the government will take, the steps that the government will take. First is to set clear targets for higher GERs and to monitor them effectively. Okay, so it will be a very short closed loop. If every year, a couple of years, if they see that the set GERs are not being attained, they will try to do a course correct and they will try to do it very quickly. That's the first target or directive that the policy has given to the document. To earmark special funds for SEDG and creation of special economic zones. I'm sorry, I keep getting confused between SEZs, special education zones. That is what the policy talks about. And to provide more support to SEDs in both public and private HEIs. And then to provide visibility, to conduct outreach programs so that the students know about all these funds and all these opportunities that are there. A major problem of the dropout is students are not even aware of all the benefits, all the opportunities that are there. So to conduct outreach programs is one major motivation point that is given by the policy to the government. To enhance gender balance during admissions, I have no idea how the government will do it. They don't talk about it in the policy. Maybe we can discuss it in the meeting. To enhance the access by creating the SEZs, and to create these SEZs by identifying geographical regions where there is a very large concentration of SEDGs. Okay, and then to develop support and technology tools like apps, the Ayushman Bharat app, for example. All these are their different tools which can help us in the outreach also, and which can help us in attaining better learning outcomes also. And finally, one major step or major push that the government is going to do in the coming years, which has already started to do, is to develop and support HEIs teaching in bilingual or local Indian languages. Now let's come to the set of the recommendations that are given to the higher education institutions. I have tried to summarize all the different recommendations into 4 specific categories. The first specific category is the admission itself. How can the HEIs tune the admission process to better achieve the goals of inclusivity and equity? So first is to mitigate the opportunity cost and fees. That is quite obvious, I would think. That is quite common sense. The government says opportunity costs are like application costs, cost to attend an interview, for example. Maybe we can provide students one-time incentive of subsidizing their travel cost to the institute for one time. These kind of things that we need to think about. Then to provide more financial assistance to the SEDGs, to conduct outreach on higher education opportunities, and to make the process more inclusive. Okay, the inclusivity is a common theme that you will see towards in the entire document. The next is the curriculum itself. How do you make the curriculum more inclusive? Inclusive means you need to include students. Maybe our students are more interested. They are into the engineering field, for example, for the sake of better employable aspects, but their heart is in arts. So can we make the curriculum more inclusive to support his passion also and to empower him as an engineer also? Can we do that? So the policy document talks about it. Then it talks about creating the curriculum towards greater employability. We need to make more employable engineers rather than trainable engineers. There's a difference between employable engineers and trainable engineers. We excel in trainable engineers, which the companies can come and pick up and train them. But employable engineers are something different. Students can manage to integrate into the technical society immediately. That is employability. Then the curriculum needs to be receptive and flexible to current requirements. And finally, we need to encourage and promote bilingual and multilingual programs by putting them into the curriculum. The third is student support. This we kind of already discussed in the previous field. So we have to ensure that the entire infrastructure is disabled friendly, And we can think about organizing some bridge courses for better integration of students. So when I was in Arizona State University during my master's, my first job was actually to teach pre-university students the basics of calculus. So by doing these bridge courses, we first of all we open the whole university culture of education to the students. They might not be exposed, so they know the different standards and rigors that are expected out of the university system. And we also help them integrate it into the education system, higher education system, very effectively, to provide socio emotional and academic support, and also to include inclusivity sensitization through talks or through workshops to students and to faculty. How do we ensure that there is no discrimination and all that kind of things? Basically, we need to sensitize students and faculty towards inclusivity. Okay. Finally, it is to develop institutional development plans. Like Professor Banerjee said, we already created the Vision 3030 document. So very similar to that, and that document needs to articulate specific plans that we can have to uplift all these SCDGs, the social economically development groups. What are our plans and how do we implement them? So the fourth point basically tells us that in addition to all these recommendations, the universities are free to brainstorm and to come up with their own particular topic points to uplift these students. So this brings us to the final part of our talk, the discussion points. So what I have done is just not to throw upon, I know that we have spoken about a lot of things. So not to just throw open the entire floor, but to maybe concentrate our discussion and energies on some specific points. I have outlined 2 or 3 points. So I have just copied and pasted some of my previous slides already, and I have made them in red. For example, this could be a very interesting discussion point. Students from SCDGs, they require constant encouragement and financial support. So we are talking about equity here. How do we do that? How do we ensure, or how do we identify students from different stratas about the quantum of support that they need, and how do we do that? That is one discussion point that we can have. And the second is from the recommendations that have been given by the policy to HEIs. How do we conduct outreach? Currently, the kind of outreach that we have are through majorly the counseling that we give to the parents are only when they come to us for admissions. So rather than interfacing with the parents and the students right at just a few moments before they're getting actually admitted, when they have already made up their mind that they want to take an admission, can we take this process to a bit earlier part in their academic curriculum, their academic calendar, so that we can encourage more students to think about joining HEIs. Maybe that's a discussion point. The second discussion point that we can have is we have to make our curriculum receptive to flexible current requirements. So a very good electrical analogy that came to my mind was the resistance and the capacitor circuit, the series circuit. You would know that when you put a resistor in series with capacitor, the resistance basically determines how fast you can charge or discharge the capacitor. So if we keep the resistance down, then we ensure that our entire circuit is very quickly receptive to the changes. So what this means is we have to reduce our inertia and we have to reduce our resistance to changes, and we have to quickly adapt to the requirements of the time. For example, machine learning, for example, battery management systems or electrical vehicles, mobility systems. These are the core areas that will make our students more employable, and these are current areas. But if we wait for 4 or 5 years to develop a curriculum structure and go through multiple committees and go and create an educational plan, we will be missing the bus. So can we identify these core areas and kind of fast track the curriculum to cater to these needs? That is something that we can talk about. And you already know that our institute is doing it already. We have robotics minors and other minors also. So our institute is already in the right path towards it. Finally, support the bridge courses, because I have been personally involved with this, so I have a slightly kind of an emotional attachment to this. I feel and I have seen that bridge courses are actually very helpful. We should think about identifying certain students in the pre-admission time, and maybe we can give them a 1 month or a 2 month tutorial kind of a setting, so that they know what kind of rigors and what kind of an education is expected out of them when they join. So this brings us to the final end. It always seems impossible until it's done, and literally every doctoral scholar has said it. I said it yesterday after I finished this PPT, because when I started it felt totally impossible to me. Okay, so thank you all, and please let's discuss.
Can I say a few things, Mr. Banerjee or Nikhil?
Please, please.
Sure, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Gaurav, compliments to you for very nice presentation, and particularly I was very impressed with your graphical, hexagonal, of course, hexagonal graphical presentation, which of course was very, I would say, impressive. I should apologize. I was not here for about 20 minutes. The first 20 or 25 minutes of your presentation, I was away. I'm sorry for that. I don't know what did you present in those slides, but whatever I have seen in your slides, of course, I have a few comments here. Which starts, I think, the first slide I saw was basically the holistic approach, and particularly the holistic teaching. If we look at holistic teaching, and you did mention three things: curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. I think 3 or 4 things you did mention. Yeah, and student support. Okay, right. Yeah. So see, now I'm coming back again to my LNM IIT. See, that's my point of view to look at this NEP vis-a-vis LNM IIT. So I'm not talking about what's going to be there in other institutes, though that's one of the concerns I do have and you all have. But if we look at locally and all, if we look at curriculum, I mean LNM IIT, I'm just looking at LNM IIT, and vis-a-vis the NEP 2020 you did present in your slides, and with reference to your holistic approach. And curriculum is something which we have done a lot of exercise, particularly in the last 2 years or so, through Board of Studies and all that, and reviews have taken place. And there has been quite a good amount of time and effort spent in that, and it has given fruitful dividends, no doubt about that. But still, I feel, and very humbly, I would express that, see, curriculum is both theory and practice, right? And as far as theory is, as far as the curriculum is concerned, curriculum no doubt is sound in terms of theory, right? It may be sound in terms of practice also, but there still would be a gap between theory and practice. There's always a gap between theory and practice. And that gap, particularly I feel, maybe that needs to be plugged in. That needs to be, that hole needs to be filled in. Why I'm referring to this is because I recall here one of the comments by Mr. Narayan Murthy, the chairman Infosys, past chairman Infosys, when he came to IIT-K somewhere in late 90s, and the event was to award him the Distinguished Alumni of IIT-K. And in that speech, we were in the auditorium. It was probably late 90s. And when he was asked to speak, and then he was very blunt in saying that, see, your IIT-K graduates are not employable. At those days, Infosys was coming up because there's the IT boom in the second part of 90s, 95 onwards. It was somewhere during that 97, 98. I don't recall exactly the year. He very bluntly, and everybody was taken aback. Oh, what she's talking about. And auditorium was full, 1,500 capacity, students, faculty, and all that. Your graduates are not employable. And then he gave reasons for that. He just quoted some codes, programming, CP, and all that stuff. I don't want to go into that and all. See, the point is here that we still might be having those gaps in the curriculum. Though I agree, we have done a lot of exercise in this. We have worked very hard in this particular arena, and we have been quite a bit successful in this. But तब भी मैं ये सोच रहा हूँ कि there still would be some gaps in theory and practice. As far as LMIT is concerned, I'm not talking of other institutes. I do not know what's going on in other institutes as of now. I have been stuck in this LMIT campus for the last 20 months now, in this room, except from this room to the my office and all that. I have not gone out in 20 months, right? So I do not know what's going on elsewhere. And even before that also, I have not gone to many places like I used to go. So curriculum part, good enough. We are okay with that. I'm satisfied with the curriculum part, but not very much to the extent that, I mean, if other departments said, okay, I mean, I would refer to my department. I'm not satisfied fully with that theory and practice. Still, there's a gap. Right? Other departments also there might. Pedagogy. Right? That's the second aspect you have said. And pedagogy, essentially, I would say, by and large, the way we are doing things, and most of us, I would not hesitate to say all of us are very well qualified to teach all these courses, and we are doing to the best of our abilities and expertise and all that, and we are doing well in that. But there's one thing in this, because when it comes, see, it's a both-way process. एक हाथ से ताली नहीं बजेगी ना, दो हाथ से ताली बजेगी. So, see, you're teaching something. A learning process is sort of, you're giving something, somebody should be ready to take. Right? So giving and taking and all that. So if you give and somebody is not ready to take, so there's a problem in that as well. Right? In that aspect, you all can understand what I'm referring to. I would not like to be very blunt here. I would not like to be very open. You all understand what you mean. So that part in pedagogy, but still, you would say a large number of students would still be really very much enthusiastic and very much interested in learning and all that. And that happens everywhere. I'm not talking LMIT, even IITs I have seen, as far as bunking of classes is concerned, right from 90s, ever since the computer internet came, bunking of classes, no matter wherever I used to go, I used to ask this question, कि भाई मुझे बताओ math 1 में क्या strength होती थी classes की and all that. And I used to get the answers which would satisfy me. So that is something which we cannot sort of deal with. I don't think even the Ministry of Education or all that would be able to do much about that. Assessment. The third thing is the assessment. Assessment, I feel, by and large, we are all sensible people here, and we are using our sense, we are using our wisdom, and we are using our humane approach as well many a times, particularly the last, you can see, 3 semesters. Ever since the spring semester of 1920, right? We are using all humane approaches. There is nothing about that. There would be again some loopholes in assessment here and there. By 1 or 2, but वो सब जगह होता है. See, it happens everywhere. You will have moles. 1 or 2, 3 or 4 in every system everywhere. Not only in this country, outside also I have seen in the Western world. Right? Okay. Then comes the support. Support now is in terms of different things. First, let me talk about the financial support. Our director is very magnanimous. He has offer so many scholarships, tuition waivers, this and that. We are doing this, and maybe other institutes are also following. Public institutes do follow. Private institutes, some of them are very stingy, very greedy. Let me use that word. I'm sorry to say that, very greedy. They may not be compromising on that. But we are, in terms of support, we are very progressive. We are offering that and all. But एक चीज मुझे इसमें दूसरी बात मुझे जो याद आ रही है. You said somewhere equity and equality. Very nicely you have represented that graphically. If I followed the American system, which of course we have followed at IITK for 4 decades and all, then you are the equity, the part. If you look at the equity part, look at the right hand side of the graph. Equity part would not be implementable if you just look at the American system, which we had. We had the American collaboration. We had, the institute was IITK was the collaboration at PL 480 right from 1961 to 71 till Bangladesh was born, and then Reagan scrapped all that treaty and became very angry and all that. You all know that, right? So we used to follow that equality, which is one of the main you find the sort of slogan of U.S. educational system. You would be aware of that. Most of you would be aware. That's fine, equality. But even I'm telling you, even in U.S., I have seen there have been institutes which are basically for minor, for black community. Right? I have visited those universities. I have seen most of the students to be black students, and most of the faculty to be black faculty, and notwithstanding, are doing very well. Not that they are the minority institutions, right? Like in Maryland State and in Georgia State and many of the places I have gone, I have visited them, right? So students also, by and large, okay, I did not interact much, but interact with faculty. Faculty also good. So that means the US also did follow that kind of equity which you are showing here. And this equity, see, though the slogan is equality, 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 right? So equity was followed in US system as well, as far as education is concerned. Not for jobs, but for education, yes. Now, if you come to equity part in India, and with reference to IITs and with reference to IITK, I'm not sure about other IITs, the older 5 IITs. I'm just talking of earlier years. I'm talking of 70s. I'm talking of 80s. I'm talking of 60s, right? So IITK had a special program, which was called a slow-paced program, right? And which means that the guy who comes for 5-year BTech in engineering, the first year, the slow-paced program was for underprivileged society, like SC, ST, and all that. Right? So we used to have, suppose I have to teach Math 1. Math 1 I'll teach in 2 semesters for a slow-paced program, which would constitute your SCs, STs, and all that. Right? A regular program was Math 1, just first semester. The Math 1 for 2 semesters for slow-paced program. So then the summer following would be then taught the other half, the Math 1 or 2, so that they would just be in sync with the second year and all. So this equity was there in IITK, right? And possibly in other older 5 IITs as well, because this was a program which was forced on the institutes by the government of India at that time. And not only that, we used to have, this is, I'm just talking of equity part, slow-paced program after you got admitted at the BTech program. But besides that, you had a preparatory course. I have taught that preparatory course also in early 80s, even 80, 81, 82. I have taught that preparatory course. What was the preparatory course? JEE now has a different cutoff. It used to be there at that time also. It's now also. Different cutoff for SC, ST, different cutoff for regular students. OBC was not there at that time. So SC, ST, a student has fallen just below the cutoff line. And I was told the cutoff was miserably low. Let's not talk about that. It's not good to talk about. So someone is just little bit low, touching this your cutoff line. That set of students used to be sent to these IITs to give them the training, and they used to be funded by the government of India, Ministry of Education at that time. Then it became MHRD. Right? They used to be funded completely, their stay, their food, their fee, and all that, everything. And we used to teach them. It would be every institute. I remember it used to be strength of 25 to 30 students. That class used to be taught physics 1, maths 1. Not physics 1, physics, maths, and chemistry. The three courses that used to be tested for JEE. And then these students would be tested by us for admission to now the regular program of BTech, right? And they will not go through JEE. And then we would test them through our own internal system, like we have for other students, right? The quizzes, exams, and all that. And by and large, all of them would get through and all that. Because the training used to be very rigorous for them. It used to be special training for these students. We used to take extra care. Let me be very frank about it. We used to take extra care for these students, and we used to teach them even overtime and make them at par with SC/ST, at least SC/ST students. If you look at the late 90s, this was a slow-paced program, and then the slow-paced program, the students themselves objected to this. Unko complex aa gaya. I'm just talking of 90s, and they said, no, we'll go to the regular program. Not all of them, some of them. No, we'll go to the regular program. And talk of math, and physics, and chemistry. We'll go to the regular program and all that. Then the institute would know they will flunk, and it would be a problem for us. The government will ask us, why are you failing these underprivileged students and all that? So then the institute at that time did decide that let's take an undertaking that you will be yourself responsible for the consequences. And on that basis of undertaking, they used to be. This is, I'm talking of the passage of time, how the things have changed. Equity part, right? I think it still is going on, it might be. Then you did talk about dropouts. See, dropouts have been there right from day one, and dropouts are even now also. Right? Though they might have reduced a bit, but I think dropouts are there. Now, what has happened, fortunately, in earlier years, dropouts, suppose in BTech admission after JEE, there are about, say, maybe 50 seats, 50 have dropped out and all that by the last date of registration, or whatever is 1 week later than that. Right? The government says, no, you fill from the remaining quota. So you should not have those who have dropped out. But dropouts were not filled in the earlier years. Dropouts would remain there, but you have to have a mechanism for dropouts, whether you would fill these seats of dropouts with the people who are on the waiting list and all that. That's of course that's a very, very good session. I think that's all I wanted to say, and rest of the stuff I have missed, which you did present in the first few slides. And as far as you say Divyang and all that, there has been, the government has introduced. We have not here. We don't have quota for physically handicapped. We don't have quota for defense personnel. Defense personnel means those have become orphans. Maybe some kid has lost his father on the war front and all that, which does happen, which has been happening in the last 20 to 25 years more than what used to happen earlier in earlier decades, right? So, that type of quota, of course, that the government has taken care of, right? So, gross enrollment ratio, good. That's taken care of. Even now in IITs, you should have all seats to be filled. Don't give us the reason that you have dropouts and these people dropped out. It's your responsibility to see that if there's a dropout, you fill that seat and make it almost. Because the numbers are so large, you cannot sort of think of, okay, let's go with, if we have 900 intake for BTech, if we have 850 finally. No, if you have 900, you have 900 and all. Okay, thank you so much. That's all from me.
All right. Thank you, sir, for your wise words and intellectual views. But unfortunately, we are running short on time, so we cannot, further take the discussion session. We'll continue with these discussions on day 2 of webinar series on Monday. And thank you, Dr. Gaurav, for your talk. It was really interesting talk, and I must admit, a very impressive presentation style as well. You took some interesting examples for, explaining the complex concepts into a very simple manner, and a very interesting, I would say, interesting description of NEP 2020. Thank you so much. So I would say that it was indeed a very productive and fruitful day 1 of this webinar series, and I would like to sincerely thank all the speakers, Professor Gurti, Professor Anupam Singh, and Dr. Gaurav Chatterjee, for taking out time and volunteering for this responsibility. And special thank to Professor Rahul Banerjee for providing the motivation behind the organization of this webinar series. And lastly, I'm also thankful to each and every participant here for their active participation in discussion, which is a really important part of this webinar series. I hope it was worth investing your time and you got a better insight of NEP 2020. So we'll continue with this initiative of webinar series on Monday, 21st of June. Another 3 interesting talks are lined up. So thank you for joining in. Director sir, would you like to give any closing remark?
Just one thing, that we also need to thank this organizing team. For that matter, they did put a lot of efforts. That entire small group of colleagues who thought about having this webinar series and the way it should go. And also thanks to all the people who have taken time to go through the NEP document and either make presentations or would be making presentations in this, as well as those colleagues who took time to go through the NEP document and had certain thoughts ready while they were interacting. So hopefully more people would join us in subsequent 2 sessions, and we would probably have the privilege of hearing good questions or views from them also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.